Chapter 1712. The weakling squad's teamwork became more and more flexible. As they moved forward, although they encountered several troubles, they managed to pass through them. Qin Yu's expression was calm, but he couldn't help but feel strange emotions in his heart. The difference between his expectations and reality was too great. Wasn't it supposed to be a plot from the Sword Master Guild? He had waited for so long, but everything had been so calm. Or was it that the time hadn't come yet? But the heaven-opening sword sect group had already been here for half a day. What preparations couldn't they have made? How could they be so slow? It wasn't that Qin Yu was being persecuted, but that he really wanted to know just what Meimu was plotting. Once they attacked, he might be able to take advantage of the chance to discover some clues. Zhang Shishan and the other 11 heaven-opening sword sect members all had bright eyes and were full of vigor. As they moved, they looked in all directions and listened carefully. Although they were cautious, there was even a hint of anticipation in their eyes. If one translated their expressions, it would be, "Where is the sword demon? Come, hurry up and come. We are already hungry and thirsty." Qin Yu's lips twitched. He thought that these brats were far too arrogant. Once they encountered a ruthless character, they would definitely cry. Their current position had already left the shallow layer of sword prison, and they had stepped into the middle layer. According to Hu Jiming, sword prison was divided into 4 layers: the shallow layer, the middle layer, the deep layer, and the core layer that no one had truly stepped into yet. As they went deeper into sword prison, the strength of the sword demon would constantly increase. After entering the middle layer, the dangers would greatly increase. They had to be careful, otherwise if they weren't careful, they might fall into a dangerous situation. But the next 2 days were even easier than in the shallow layer of sword prison. They only encountered a single middle-grade sword demon. From the looks of it, he had been injured before and was hiding underground to recover. He only rushed out after being roused by them. The eyes of the members of the fish belly team, who had been waiting anxiously for a long time, immediately lit up. Without saying a word, they immediately greeted him. In terms of strength, a middle-grade sword demon was indeed much stronger than a low-grade sword demon. But he was entangled in the sword array, and Zhang Sheshan's flowing light sword had reached the essence of steady, accurate, and ruthless. The middle-rank sword demon, who was covered in cuts and bruises, let out an unwilling roar and exploded. A pure sword aura surged out. "We've been hungry for a long time." Everyone hurriedly sat down cross-legged and absorbed the sword aura with all their might. As for vigilance, although they couldn't see the sect master's figure, there was no doubt that he was here. If there was an accident, he would definitely warn them. This was something that was tacitly agreed upon during the sword sect exam, and it wasn't against the rules. Therefore, when many sword sects chose temporary Dao protectors for the sword sect examination, their cultivation in the sword Dao was secondary. The most important thing was their keen senses. It was to be able to give the sect disciples a warning in advance, which could be very useful. Qin, you looked down at the jade token. The light that had appeared was clearly larger than before, and it was even redder. This meant that the heaven-splitting sword sect had killed a middle-grade sword demon. The calculation method of a mid-grade sword demon had a set of strict coefficients. Compared to a low-grade sword demon, the ratio was about 1 to 10. The results would fluctuate depending on the strength of the sword demon. This unlucky medium-grade sword demon in front of him could at most resist 8 low-grade sword demons. After all, it wasn't in a good state to begin with. Moreover, Qin Yu felt that when this middle-grade sword demon rushed out from the ground just now, it wasn't trying to sneak attack them. Rather, it was preparing to escape. That's right, escape. However, before this middle-grade sword demon could make a move, it was easily killed by the team of weaklings who had been waiting for a long time. This was a bit strange. As he thought about it, the luck of the waiting squad couldn't be any better. The dangers they encountered along the way were far less than what Hu Jiming had said. Could this be the trump card that Little Meaty had given them? For instance, something with her aura that could scare away the sword demons. Thus, when the waiting squad entered Sword Prison, they didn't need to rely on killing more sword demons. Rather, they only needed to explore deeper. This matched up with what Little Meaty had said before when she told him to go all the way. If this was really the case, then the difficulty of this trip to Sword Prison would plummet. But if this was the case, why did Little Meaty want him to personally make this trip? A day tour of Sword Prison? Forget it! Where would he find the time to do so? There was a problem. There was definitely a problem. Chinyu frowned and thought for a long time. But he knew too little and couldn't find a breakthrough point. He could only suppress this thought. Whatever, he would take it one step at a time. Since Little Meaty had asked him to come, there would definitely be an answer as long as he continued to observe. There was one more thing. Chinyu suddenly thought of why the Sword Master Association hadn't arrived yet. For example, if the other party wanted to use a borrowed knife to kill others, then they wanted to use the sword demons of Sword Prison to eliminate the Heavenly Splitting Sword Sect. Hiss! This plan might be difficult to carry out. As the Heavenly Splitting Sword Sect Squad was searching for the sword demons, they wished they could carve a slogan on their foreheads that read, "I Sword Cultivators only wish to fight." At this time, most of the great sword sect squads that had entered the middle level of Sword Prison had encountered trouble. There were too many sword demons. Their numbers were far greater than what was recorded in the sect's records. Moreover, their strength seemed to be much greater. The great sword sect was better off. Most of their disciples were strong, and in addition to the power of their immortal swords, after a brief moment of surprise, they were still able to cut through the sword demons like they were vegetables. To them, the threat of a middle-grade sword demon was a victory delivered to their doorstep. But the small sword sect was different. Although they could establish a foothold in Swallow Mountain, their sphere of influence was small and their profits were limited. In terms of financial resources, they couldn't compare with the great sword sect. As a result, their equipment was far inferior compared to big sword sect's disciples. And because of the disparity in fame between the sects, most of the highly talented disciples were taken in by the great sword sect. This further increased the disparity in strength between the two sides. People began to die. Some of the smaller sword sects were more ambitious, or perhaps they could bear the loss of their disciples. But the Tao protectors still didn't care. However, some of the Tao protectors of the sword sect were already forced to make a move to save them. Their strengths were weak to begin with, and there were very few disciples with good natural endowments in the sect. If all of them were to perish here, then the sect would face the situation of having no successors. And if they helped, that meant they would be eliminated. Their ranking would be at the bottom, and they would become the lowest rank in this sword sect examination. According to the rules of Swallow Mountain, the sword sect that ranked last in the examination would have its sphere of influence and income reduced by a certain ratio. Small sword sects were already weak to begin with. After repeated reductions, it would only cause them to become weaker and weaker. Elder, don't help. We can still fight. A sword cultivator's face was pale. There was a horrifying wound on his chest. Blood dyed half his body red as he shouted behind him. There were only 6 sword cultivators left beside him. 5 of them had already fallen in the attack of the sword demon. The remaining 7 all had determined expressions. With a long sigh, the elder of the sect appeared behind them with a haggard face and a gloomy look in his eyes. He said softly, "You've done well. You've performed better than expected. However, I can't allow you to stay in the sword prison any longer." He raised his hand to stop the disciples from speaking. "This old man knows that you all wish to fight for a better ranking for the sect. But you must remember that only outstanding disciples are the future of a sword sect. If all of you die here, so what if the sect's ranking can rise a step? Elder." The group of sword cultivators had bitter expressions. Among them, 2 female disciples could not help but burst into tears. "Don't cry. You are all the most outstanding children. You are the future of our Cliff Mountain Sword sect. The elder smiled. Don't worry. As long as we old bones do not fall, we will definitely hold up the sky for you in Swallow Mountain. Disciples with heavy injuries, immediately adjust your breathing. Those with light injuries are responsible for cleaning up the corpses of your fellow disciples. In an hour, this old man will take you away. Swoosh! A sword shadow swept past, slicing the sword demon in front of it into pieces. Kong Wei-jin sighed inwardly. The situation in the sword prison was different from the previous years. Otherwise, these disciples would have obtained better results. If he returned like this, the sect master would be disappointed. But old Kong believed that the sect master would approve of his choice. This time, the 12 disciples that entered the sword prison were the last hope of the Cliff Mountain Sword sect. They could not be allowed to die here. Let's go. Kong Wei-jin crushed the jade token in his hand. This meant that the Cliff Mountain Sword sect's examination was over. Cheating? That was impossible. Until now, no one had been able to break the sword master's tricks, and no one dared to try. At this time in the middle layer of the sword prison, there were many sword sects that made the same choice as the Cliff Mountain Sword sect. They gave up on the examination to protect their disciples. In the world of cultivators, it was normal for the strong to be eliminated. Since you did not have the ability to set the rules, you could only submit to the rules. Unlike the small sword sects that left quietly, the big sword sects team continued to advance bravely, killing the sword demons along the way and breaking into the depths of the sword prison. The number of sword demons killed was only a part of the overall score. Exploring the depths of the sword prison was also indispensable. The small sword sects retreated towards the entrance on the surface. The big sword sect broke out of the middle layer of the sword prison and entered the depths of the sword prison to fight. To them, entering the depths of the sword prison was the true start of the examination. What happened before was just a warm-up. At the entrance of the sword prison, halfway up a mountain, someone had slashed it with a sword. The steep peak had turned into a smooth, mirror-like wall. Now, the surface of the wall glowed and automatically formed numbers, forming two big lists on the left and right. The dark red on the left represented the sword demon killing list. The record token that was assigned would send real-time information to the list. The light green on the right represented the depth of the sword prison, which was also determined according to the position of the record token. As for the depth of the exploration, the record token would capture the aura of all the participants. Unless the members of the team died, only the surviving members of the team could be recorded. Apart from that, the patrolling team in the sword prison would also confirm the score twice to prevent cheating. Currently, on the dark red killing list, the Cold Frost Sword sect was ranked the highest. This was not surprising. After all, as a member of the Sword Master Union, the Cold Frost Sword sect, one of the 10 sword sects of Yanren Mountain, was famous for its killing. The disciples of the sect cultivated the Cold Frost Sword technique. When they attacked, it was like the cold wind of midwinter sweeping the earth, reaping all lives. In second place was the Spring Wind Sword sect. This was not surprising. The strength of the Spring Wind Sword sect was not to be underestimated. Moreover, their sword technique was the bane of the sword demons. In third place was the South Sea Sword sect. This was the newest member of the Sword Master Union. He had displayed the formidable strength of an outsider in the sword sect's great examination. This was a great deterrent to all the xenophobes of Yanren Mountain. Afterwards, the ranking list was basically occupied by the various great sword sections. All the way to the 100th place, the very bottom of the ranking list, the heaven-splitting sword sect's name couldn't be found. Similarly, the light green list on the right didn't have it either. Hu Jiming frowned, helplessness in his eyes. Although he had already expected this, when the truth was placed in front of him, he still felt disappointed. After all, whether it was sect master Chinyu or the great elder, both of them had a confident attitude. Just like this? Hu Jiming bitterly smiled. He no longer had any expectations. He only hoped that the sect master could bring back the people he had brought into the heaven-splitting sword sect. Chapter 17:13. Soon, Hu Jiming's complexion became heavy. News spread out that because the sword demons in the middle levels of sword prison had risen in strength, the various sword sects had suffered heavy casualties and had withdrawn from the sword sect examination. Although they were only small sword sects, in Hu Jiming's opinion, they were much stronger than the small teams of the heaven-splitting sword sect. If even they had suffered heavy casualties, the fate of the small teams could be imagined. Hu Jiming subconsciously took several steps forwards. He stared at the entrance of Sword Prison, hoping to immediately see the figures of the sect master and the others. But no matter how he waited, no one emerged from the entrance of Sword Prison. It wasn't just the heaven-splitting sword sect, but all the other sword sects that had given up on the examination hadn't emerged from underground. Something had happened. As this thought raced through his mind, Hu Jiming turned and looked around. As expected, outside Sword Prison, the sword cultivators from all over had heavy expressions. Whoosh, whoosh, the humming of swords rang out. At first it was extremely far away, but in the blink of an eye it arrived. The air was cut apart at high speeds, forming distortions. Two figures appeared in the skies above the entrance of Sword Prison. As they looked down, a dense sword intent circulated around them, suffocating one's mind. Primordius Sword Master. Eastern Mountain Sword Master. Cries of alarm rang out. The sword cultivators' complexions became increasingly dignified. Two great sword masters had been alerted to come investigate together. As expected, something had happened. Suddenly, the Eastern Mountain Sword Master pointed a finger. A monstrous sword aura erupted, condensing into a 1,000-foot-long sword that slashed downwards. With a loud explosion, the ground within 1,000 meters cracked apart, twisted into powder by the devastating sword aura. But the entrance to Sword Prison was still intact. This terrifying sword strike hadn't been able to cause any damage to it. The Eastern Mountain Sword Master had a gloomy expression. He glanced at the Primordius Sword Master and said, "Summon a meeting of sword masters. Sword Prison has gone out of control." The Primordius Sword Master grasped his hand, isolating space. In order to avoid causing panic, do not announce this news for now. The Eastern Mountain Sword Master frowned. He thought for a moment and then slowly nodded. The Primordius Sword Master removed the isolation barrier. With the support of his powerful cultivation, his voice reverberated through the world. There has been an accident within Sword Prison. Although it is a bit troublesome, it can definitely be resolved. Now do not make random guesses. Just wait patiently. The two sword masters raised their hands at the same time, unleashing sword breaths towards the sky. They instantly turned into sword shadows, tearing through the clouds and scattering down endless sunlight. An hour later, the 10 sword masters gathered outside the sword prison. The East Mountain Sword Master had an ugly expression on his face. On the way here, we've tried to contact the patrol team in Sword Prison. We can basically confirm that Sword Prison has indeed gone out of control. The expressions of the Sword Master Guild members changed slightly. Sword Prison losing control to the sword cultivators of Swallow Ran Mountain. This was an extremely terrifying thing. It meant that the sword prison was sealed and they could not even enter or leave. At the same time, the strength of the sword devils in the sword prison would skyrocket. What was even more terrifying was that the core layer of the sword prison might open up and release a terrifying, peerless rank sword devil. In the history of Yen Ran Mountain, there had been 2 incidents where sword prison went out of control. Each time, there were heavy casualties of the sword cultivators of the various sects that entered sword prison. Less than a tenth of them came out alive. Before the opening of the sword prison, we had already investigated it. The environment of the sword prison was stable, and there were no signs of it going out of control. How did the situation suddenly deteriorate? The dreamy cloud swordmaster asked in a low voice. The spring wind swordmaster said slowly, "Time is too short." The space was silent. Everyone understood the deeper meaning of his words. Even though most of them had held the mentality of watching from the sidelines and were reluctant to give in, now that the sword jail had gone out of control, their mentality naturally changed. The sword sect examination covered all the sword sects, including the 10 sword sects. Now, in the sword prison, there might be their disciples, descendants of bloodlines, or descendants of old friends. One could imagine how the sword masters felt. The South Sea sword sect leader they had received the most stares. No matter what, they were the first to propose the sword sect examination. Naturally, they were the first to bear the brunt. The Frost Sword Master said, "You and I did not want this to happen. Now, the most important thing is to find a way to open the sword prison and save the disciples of the various sections." That's right. As for the responsibility for this matter and the subsequent problems, we can discuss it after we settle it, the Spring Wind Sword Master said calmly. The Frost Sword Master looked up with a cold gaze. Spring Wind Sword Master is right. Soon, the Sword Masters Guild reached an agreement and sent a message to the Sword Prison's patrol team, informing the sword cultivators of the various sects that the sword prison had gone out of control. The examination was cancelled, and they were requested to return to the shallow layer of the sword prison immediately. Then, they would try to open the sword prison from the inside. The order had been issued, but there was no response. The East Mountains Sword Master moved and came to the entrance of the sword prison. After sensing for a few breaths, his eyes became gloomier. Their communication with the sword prison had been cut off. After killing the 3 middle-grade sword devils, the sharp underdog team found that they had arrived at the edge of the deeper layer of the sword prison. This scene made them feel that something was wrong. After all, the sword prison was famous, and everyone had heard of it. That was it. Zhang Xiaoshan frowned and glanced around. After coming here, the light was even dimmer. It was not that the moss on the rock walls had decreased. In fact, as they went deeper, the moss grew more and more luxuriant. However, it could not withstand the darkness of the underground. Being in it, he felt as if a huge mountain was pressing on his heart. It was so oppressive that even breathing became especially difficult. Looking back, he still did not see the sect master. Thinking of the Grand Elder's instructions before leaving the sword sect, Zhang Sheshan took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Rest here for an hour. After that, we will enter the deeper layer of the sword prison." Yes, through the previous battles, the taciturn Zhang Sheshan had gained the trust of the squad members. They sat down cross-legged one after another. Although they had easily broken through the shallow and middle layers of the sword prison, the deeper layers were the most dangerous areas of the sword prison. However, the deeper region was the most dangerous place in sword prison. No one could be sure of the exact situation. Being more cautious and adjusting oneself to the best state before stepping into it was indeed the best choice. Qin Yu wasn't too far away from the squad. He restrained his aura and seemed to blend into the darkness as he silently observed his surroundings. In fact, Qin Yu had already sensed the stifling feeling that Zhang Sheshan had given birth to. Moreover, it was 10 times, 100 times more intense than Zhang Sheshan's. Although he didn't know what the reason was, his intuition told him that something had happened in the sword prison. As for Little Meaty, she must have already known this. Thus, she had asked him to personally bring them in. At this time, Qin Yu's complexion changed. He looked up towards the deeper layers of the sword prison. Shua! He took a step forward, and his figure instantly appeared in front of the underdog squad. Zhang Sheshan was the first to awaken. His complexion changed. Sect Master. The other members of the team got up one after another, their eyes scanning the surroundings vigilantly. There was silence, no change at all. This caused everyone to subconsciously reveal puzzled expressions. "Retreat!" Qin Yu shouted out loud. He flicked his sleeves, and an invisible strength gushed out, wrapping around the underdog squad members and pushing them away. In the next moment, the darkness in front of them became even thicker. Suddenly it tumbled like fog. Miserable screams and the sound of breaking air echoed out. As the fog surged, it also released a strong smell of blood. "Save me! Get out of my way! Get out of my way! I don't want to die!" Whoosh! A figure rushed out from the darkness. His face was pale, and his body was covered in wounds. As he saw the people from the heavens splitting sword sect, not too far away, he subconsciously revealed a happy expression. "Save!" As soon as the word left his mouth, the sharp blade of the sword pierced through his chest, directly shattering his heart. A large hand covered in black scales reached out from the darkness and grabbed the sword cultivator who hadn't died yet. With a howl of despair, it pulled him back into the darkness. Seeing this, the underdog squad members felt as if they had fallen into an icy lake. Their bodies stiffened and their faces drained of blood. The sword edge that flashed with a cold light and the large hand that was covered in scales were like a nightmare, madly stimulating their nerves. Qin Yu frowned. His complexion was dignified as he stared at the darkness in front of him. Since he had sensed danger, what he should do now was to immediately lead the underdog squad away. But Qin Yu always felt that there were pairs of icy cold and cruel eyes locked onto them in the darkness. As long as they turned around and fled, revealing their weakness, they would immediately face the pursuit from the darkness. After a brief struggle in his mind, Qin Yu took a deep breath and stood still. As the underdog squad members saw their sect master stand still, they were apprehensive and frightened, but they didn't dare to move. In the darkness, the sounds of fighting and miserable screams gradually faded away. But what followed was the sound of tearing and chewing. It wasn't obvious, but it was a particularly horrifying sound. Gulp! It was unknown who gulped. In the silence, this sound could be heard clearly. An even stronger smell of blood spread out from the darkness. It lingered in the air like an invisible tongue that constantly licked at everyone. Zhang Xiashan took a deep breath. He clenched his teeth and said, "Sect Master." Qin Yu didn't turn around. His tone was calm. "Don't move." The chewing sounds vanished. The feeling of being watched reached its peak at this moment. Even Qin Yu felt his hair stand on end. There was silence. After a moment, he suddenly moved. He lifted his hand. "It's fine." His voice was still calm, but there was a bit more difficulty to it. Puff, puff, puff. Several underdog squad members relaxed and slumped to the ground. Their pores opened and sweat gushed out, soaking their robes as they gasped for breath. This couldn't be blamed on them. If it weren't for his status, Qin Yu would have also sat down and relaxed. His calves were still cramping, just a little bit more. Just now, Qin Yu felt that a great battle was inevitable. At that time, he might be able to escape, but Zhang Xiashan and the others would likely become food in Sword Demon's stomach. It was only after a long time that the underdog squad members regained their composure. Their faces flushed red. Qin Yu said, "With your cultivations, it isn't shameful for you to be able to stand up." He hesitated for a moment. "You all saw what happened just now. The depths of Sword Prison are dangerous, and you can lose your life at any moment. So, you should all leave now and return to the shallow levels of Sword Prison. I will go in and take a look myself." Zhang Xiashan took a deep breath. "Sect Master, the Great Elder ordered us to ensure your safety." He bowed. "For this reason, the Great Elder has given us some hidden cards. So, Sect Master, please rest assured that we can help you." Qin Yu frowned. "You must think this through. Once you go in, you might not be able to return." Zhang Xiashan bitterly smiled. "Sect Master is right, but we don't dare to face the Great Elder's anger. Sect Master, please. I ask Sect Master to help us." The underdog squad members bowed. Qin Yu thought about it. This was indeed something Meaty could do. "Very well. You must be careful. If you really encounter danger, I might not be able to protect you." Zhang Xiashan and the others relaxed. They weren't fools. Being able to explain things clearly was far better than taking on everything. "Are you ready?" The underdog squad members took a deep breath and nodded. Qin Yu waved his hand and was the first to walk into the depths of Sword Prison. As for the Tao protectors taking action and directly being eliminated from the Sword Sect's great examination, he felt that there was no need to consider this any further. Chapter 1714. In the depths of Sword Prison, Su Jing's face was livid and her eyes were filled with anger. Something's wrong. Although the Sword Prison was dangerous, it was definitely not that terrifying. When the sword demons attacked just now, not to mention that their strength was far beyond the normal range, there were actually 2 shadow sword demons. If it weren't for the fact that he had a strange treasure of the South Sea Sword Sect on him, alerting the sect disciples ahead of time, his fate would have been even worse than it was now. "Elder." The disciples of the South Sea Sword Sect bowed in greeting. Most of their faces revealed a hint of absent-mindedness. These proud geniuses of the past had yet to recover from this sudden blow. Su Jing said solemnly, "There are changes in the Sword Prison. Collect the corpses of our fellow disciples. We will temporarily retreat from the deeper regions of the Sword Prison." His gaze swept across the 2 corpses on the ground as a look of regret flashed past his eyes. He had a good impression of both of them. They were 2 of the most talented disciples the South Sea Sword Sect had taken in recent years. They should not have died in the Sword Prison. If they could grow up smoothly 100 years later, the South Sea Sword Sect would definitely gain another pillar of support. Su Jing closed her eyes and opened them again. Her expression became calm again. Death was death. There was no point in thinking about it now. The most important thing was to protect the remaining disciples and minimize casualties. "Elder." Jean Hua's complexion changed. "When we entered Sword Prison, we were already prepared to sacrifice ourselves for the sect." The South Sea Sword Sect was an outsider. Although they were now ranked as one of the 10 sword sects, there were far, far too many sinister gazes hidden behind their smiles. As disciples, they were deeply moved by this. This required the South Sea Sword Sect to maintain a powerful deterrence at all times. Only then could these gazes remain at the level of gazes, not daring to act blindly without thinking. On the other hand, the Sword Sect's rankings during the Sword Sect's exam was the time to show off his muscles. Su Jing raised her hand, stopping the others from continuing to speak. "I want you to temporarily withdraw from the deeper regions of the Sword Prison, but I don't mean to give up on the exam. The current situation is unclear, so observing is the best choice." "All right, I've already made up my mind on this matter. All of you don't have to say anything else." Jinhua and the other disciples of the South Sea Sword Sect could only lower their heads and comply. After collecting the corpses of their companions, the group didn't stop at all. Under Su Jing's lead, they headed up the Sword Prison. But soon, Su Jing stopped in his tracks. His pupils constricted as he stared into the darkness. Wherever he looked, the dim green light released by the moss on the rock wall seemed to be swallowed by an invisible force and turned extremely dark. Looking at this place, it was like looking into an abyss. Endless fear surged out from the bottom of his heart, threatening to devour his mind. The disciples of the South Sea Sword Sect all turned pale. "Pa! Pa!" The sound of footsteps could be heard, and the darkness was broken. A figure clad in black scale armor and holding a snow-white sword walked out. It had a pair of eyes that were as red as magma. They were filled with killing intent and destruction. There was also a trace of cruelty and coldness in them. It was as if it was a destructive machine with its own intelligence. Peerless grade sword devil. Su Jing growled subconsciously. She instantly realized that she had lost control of the sword prison. As an extraordinary elder of the South Sea sword sect, he knew many things that surpassed his own status. Of course, he knew what the appearance of a peerless sword demon signified. Run. Hum! A sword cry erupted. Su Jing didn't hesitate to attack with her sword. The peak of the vast ocean sword art caused the dark underground to rumble with the roar of raging waves. She rushed forwards, slashing towards the peerless sword demon. He used his strongest attack. Otherwise, let alone buying time for Jinhua and the other disciples to escape, he himself would die here. As they heard the words, peerless sword demon, Jinhua and the others froze. Then, they turned and fled without hesitation. Before entering Sword Prison, they had been informed of some information regarding Sword Prison. One of these taboos was the peerless sword demon. In Sword Prison, once a peerless sword demon appears, there is no need to worry about the sword sex examination. All disciples are to immediately retreat to the shallow layers of Sword Prison and protect yourselves. These were the original words of sect Master Wei Hung, and now a peerless sword demon had truly appeared. Jinhua and the others didn't know what its appearance meant, but without a doubt, this was an extremely terrifying crisis. Rumble, rumble. Behind them, there was a heaven-shaking explosion. The familiar aura of the vast ocean sword art that Elder Su Jing was familiar with had clearly fallen into a bitter struggle. And his opponent was only a sword demon. Was this the strength of a peerless sword demon? Before Jinhua and the other South Sea sword sect disciples could think any further, darkness wildly surged in the direction they were fleeing. Sword demons appeared one after another, howling as they rushed towards them. High-grade sword demons. In the previous battle where they had lost 2 of their fellow disciples, they had already encountered one. Kill! Jinhua roared out loud. The sword in his hand came slashing down. In Sword Prison, once one encountered a sword demon, they would fight to the death with the sword cultivator. Unless all of them were killed, it was impossible to escape. The only thing worth celebrating was that there wasn't a terrifying peerless sword demon amongst these sword demons. Otherwise, just a single peerless sword demon would be enough to kill all of them here. And as the South Sea sword sect fell into a bitter struggle, the teams that rushed into the deeper layers of Sword Prison encountered great trouble. If there had to be an exception, then it would be the heaven-splitting sword sect. After entering the deeper layers of Sword Prison, they suddenly discovered that besides the surroundings being a little quieter, it was also a little darker and even more peaceful than before. Simply put, it had already been over 4 hours since they entered the deeper layers of Sword Prison, but they hadn't encountered a single sword demon. There really wasn't a single one, let alone a high-grade one. There wasn't even a low-grade one. Qin, you could already determine that it was Little Meaty who had caused the sword demons of Sword Prison to avoid their position on their own. But this didn't mean that the danger had completely disappeared. In the deathly silence of the darkness, he could faintly sense some eyes looking at him. They were cold and oppressive, causing his heart to tighten. From the moment they entered the deeper layers of Sword Prison until now, they hadn't disappeared. Sect Master. Zhang Xiaoshan wanted to say something, but hesitated. His eyes swept around and his body subconsciously tensed. If even he was like this, then the other members of the underdog squad were even more nervous. It seemed that if it weren't for the fact that they were terrified of Little Meaty's methods, they would have already cried out and begged to leave. In truth, this seemingly safe silence was actually the greatest torture. It was like they were walking on the cusp of a storm. At any moment, they could take a single step and fall to their deaths. It was too torturous. Qin Yu shook his head. I have no idea what happened either. I can only tell you that compared to the other sword cultivators that entered Sword Prison, we are already much luckier. The darkness was incomparably quiet. The space within Sword Prison was distorted by an invisible strength causing one's perception to become unstable and blurry. But Qin Yu could still feel a trace of abnormality, as well as the faint smell of blood. It was very thin, but it had already soaked through every inch of the darkness. People had died, and many had died. At this time, those that were able to enter the depths of sword prison were undoubtedly the elite disciples of the various great sword sects of Swallow Ran Mountain. Among these big sword sects groups, there would be a powerful Tao protector following them. For instance, the South Sea Sword Sect team. Qin Yu had clearly seen that the Tao protector was Elder Su Jing, whom he had met once before. With these powerful guardians, and in addition to the disciples of the various great sword sects, their strength wasn't bad to begin with. Yet there were still such serious casualties. Qin Yu subconsciously thought back to the scene he saw before, the sword that pierced through his chest and pierced through his body, as well as the scaly hand that reached out from the darkness and pulled that dying sword cultivator back into the darkness. There was already no doubt that an accident had occurred in sword prison, but he just didn't know, was this accident really an accident? Qin Yu guessed that it was done by someone. But who was the person who did this? Was it Little Meaty? Qin Yu didn't think so. The sword sect's grand examination had nothing to do with them. This was a decision made by the Sword Master Association, and the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect was just passively accepting it. And within the Sword Master Association, the ones pushing this matter with all their strength were the South Sea Sword Sect and the Frigid Frost Sword Sect that was hidden even deeper. These matters weren't secrets that were difficult to reach. As a true wandering cultivator, Hu Jiming knew the inside story like the back of his hand. So it was likely that the South Sea Sword Sect and the Frigid Frost Sword Sect had joined forces. But what was their goal? Moreover, if it was the Sword Sect's grand examination, the two great sword sects would need to send disciples to attend. Before, outside sword prison, Qin Yu had searched for the teams of the two great sword sections. Although he had only seen them from afar, he was able to determine that they weren't just there to make up the numbers. Whether it was the Tao protectors or the disciples participating in the sword sect's grand examination, they were all in line with the status of a member of the 10 great sword sections, unless they had similar methods to avoid being attacked by the sword demon in sword prison. Otherwise, if they sent the Tao protectors and disciples in, they would suffer heavy losses, not hesitating to sacrifice themselves to harm the great sword sects of Swallow Mountain. This reason clearly didn't hold water. If it really was the South Sea Sword Sect and the Frigid Frost Sword Sect that had acted, then there had to be another reason. Or perhaps someone had taken advantage of the sudden opening of Sword Prison to prepare a pleasant surprise for the great sword sects of Swallow Mountain. As Qin Yu's thoughts raced, he was suddenly interrupted by some movements. He turned to look into the darkness, and his complexion changed. Although he was still at a relatively unfamiliar stage when it came to the various great sword sects of Swallow Mountain, he had still done some homework. However, they had still done their homework on a colossus like the 10-sword sect. This was all thanks to Hu Jiming's participation, the South Sea Sword Sect's vast sea sword art. Moreover, it was clear that his opponent had cultivated it to an extremely profound degree. When his sword came out, there was actually a faint feeling of the raging sea. Waves billowed out, sweeping out in all directions, their momentum overwhelming the heavens. Within Sword Prison, the only one who cultivated the vast sea sword art and was able to reach such a boundary was Su Jing. It was clear that he had fallen into a bitter struggle, and Su Jing's opponent had a strange and cruel sword aura and an astonishing killing power. These fluctuations, they were sword demons. In Sword Prison, there was actually such a terrifyingly strong sword demon. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He felt as if he had misunderstood something. At the very least, the South Sea Sword Sect definitely wasn't the mastermind behind the changes in Sword Prison. Otherwise, there was no reason for them to fall into such a dangerous situation. Of course, he couldn't be lacking in caution. He had to prevent the scene in front of him from being deliberately planned out and injuring himself. Qin Yu lifted a hand. The small fry squad hurriedly stopped. Can the trump cards that the great elder gave you protect yourselves in the depths of sword prison? Zhang Sheshan thought for a moment. It should be possible. He quickly added, in truth, this disciple and the others haven't tested it yet. You all stay here. If an accident occurs, you can use your trump cards to protect yourselves. I will go ahead and take a look. As Qin Yu spoke, his figure flashed and he held forwards. If Little Meaty really had done something so that the sword demons of Sword Prison didn't dare approach them, Zhang Sheshan and the others had it on them, and Qin Yu didn't lack it either. If they left the squad, there was a high chance there wouldn't be any trouble. If he brought them along, there was a chance that they would be implicated in the dangers that the South Sea sword sect was currently encountering. Moreover, it wouldn't be beneficial for Qin Yu to secretly observe the situation and determine whether it was true or false. Of course, the most important reason was that the two sides weren't too far apart. If there really was a problem, Qin Yu could quickly rush back. The movements in front became increasingly loud. He could clearly hear the roars of rolling waves. They were about to arrive. Qin Yu restrained his aura. His entire person was like a shadow as he melted into the darkness. He looked forwards with rapt attention. One of the two sides fighting was indeed the South Sea sword sect's Su Jing. With a single glance, he knew that the killing scene in front of him wasn't an act. This was because this elder Su Jing was in a perilous situation. She was being completely suppressed. If it weren't for the vast sea sword art having a decent defensive effect, she feared she would have already been cut down. Across from Su Jing was a strange sword demon whose body was covered in black scales. Its eyes were crimson like magma, and it wielded a snow-white sword that released an extremely sharp aura of annihilation. Each sword strike gave off a horrifying feeling that all things in the world could be annihilated. Peerless sword demon. With just a glance, Qin Yu recalled the name that Hu Jiming had solemnly mentioned. He had said that he didn't know what a peerless sword demon meant. He had only inadvertently learned that such a terrifying sword demon existed in Sword Prison. To sword cultivators, the appearance of such a sword demon often meant disaster. And without accident, the palm that Qin Yu saw before he stepped into the depths of Sword Prison had come from a peerless sword demon. Qin Yu's concealment methods were extremely brilliant, but his existence had still been discovered. It wasn't Su Jing, but the peerless sword demon whose entire body was covered in scales. Its crimson magma eyes suddenly swept over where Qin Yu was hiding. Although it was only a brief glance, it caused Qin Yu to instantly feel a numbing sensation, as if an electric current was flowing through his body. His thoughts raced, and Qin Yu made a decision. He stepped forwards and removed his concealment state. Bang! A sword slashed out. The sword light was dazzling to the extreme, but it didn't give off the slightest feeling of righteousness. Instead, there was only endless darkness and brutality. Su Jing was sent flying backwards. The vast sea sword breath in front of him shook, causing his chest to violently shake, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. Sect Master Qin. Seeing Qin Yu, his complexion changed. Across from him, the peerless sword demon's crimson eyes stubbornly glared at Qin Yu. A deep dread appeared in his eyes. Roar! He gave a deep roar. Scram! Scram! Indeed, high-grade sword demons and even more formidable peerless sword demons had already developed their own spiritual wisdom. This was the reason why the heaven-splitting sword sect squad had been so peaceful after entering the depths of Sword Prison. They hadn't even encountered a single sword demon. Qin Yu looked up. Facing the peerless sword demon, he stepped forwards. Roar! With a loud roar, the peerless sword demon turned and fled. With a loud whoosh, it submerged into the darkness and vanished from sight. It had actually fled like this. Su Jing's eyes widened as he saw this. He revealed a look of disbelief and vigilance. Chapter 1715. Qin turned and calmly looked at Su Jing. Although it ran away, I cannot guarantee that it won't call its companions back. So we should leave here first. Then he paused. I know that Elder Su Jing is very confused, but if the changes in Sword Prison were related to me, I would not appear here. Su Jing thought for a moment and clenched his teeth. My South Sea Sword Sect's disciples are not far from here. I will take them with me. Qin frowned and looked at him. Su Jing said, as an elder of the South Sea Sword Sect and the Tao Protector of Sword Prison, I will not run away alone. Let's talk as we walk. Qin Yu's figure flashed into the darkness. Su Jing paused for a moment before following him, maintaining a certain distance between the two of them. Elder Su, you can speak now. I know very little about Sword Prison, Qin Yu said without turning his head. Su Jing finally understood what he meant when he said to talk as we walk. After several breaths of silence, he said, Sword Prison has gone out of control. Whether what Qin Yu said was true or false, at this point there was no need to hide it anymore. Most importantly, Su Jing had just witnessed Qin Yu frightening away a peerless sword demon with terrifying strength with her own eyes. And the explanation he gave just now was convincing enough. If the changes in Sword Prison were related to Qin Yu, then it was impossible for him to appear here and expose himself. At this moment, Su Jing made a decision. He would attach himself to the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect and leave Sword Prison alive. As for the Cold Frost Sword Sect's attitude and the South Sea Sword Sect's stance, he didn't care. With this thought in mind, his attitude changed. Su Jing took a deep breath and said, Sword Prison going out of control means that the inside of Sword Prison has entered a berserk state for some unknown reason. The entrance to Sword Prison is sealed and the sword demons bred inside will become much stronger. He looked at Qin Yu, but the most terrifying thing is not this. Every time Sword Prison goes out of control, it means that the core layer is opened. That is why a powerful, peerless sword demon like the one just appeared. This is the greatest secret of Swallow Mountain. Only the sect master of the 10 Sword Sect and the members of the Sword Master Association have the qualifications to know about this. So this was the origin of peerless sword demons. The core layer of Sword Prison was so ridiculously strong. Qin Yu's thoughts raced, and he suddenly asked, What is in the core layer of Sword Prison? Since Elder Su is being so open and honest, you should be very clear that we can only survive this unforeseen event if we tell each other the truth now. Su Jing shook her head and spoke quickly. No one knows the secret of the core layer of Sword Prison. Back then, when Sword Prison went out of control for the first time, a peerless sword devil appeared. The sword cultivators of Swallow Ran Mountain suffered heavy casualties. They had indeed tried to explore the core layer of Sword Prison, but all the sword cultivators who entered were buried within. None of them could leave alive. Elder Su, you seem to be hiding something. Su Jing. He sucked in a deep breath and clenched his teeth. That's right. I have indeed heard the sect master mention some rumors regarding Swallow Run Mountain, but these are only rumors without any proof. Qin Yu said, I want to know. Su Jing nodded. It is rumored that deep within Swallow Run Mountain there is a powerful seal, and the sealed object is a peerless divine weapon. It is because of this that the massive Swallow Run Mountain is incomparably suitable for sword cultivators. After many generations of development, it has become the holy land of the sword path. As for Sword Prison, it is a product formed when the seal's strength leaked out. The sword demon is formed when the aura of that sealed object passes through the seal. But this is only a rumor. There are several hundred sword sects in Swallow Run Mountain, but I have never heard of anyone finding any clues about the seal. Qin Yu's eyes brightened. He slowly said, Perhaps the core layer of Sword Prison that you speak of is that seal. Su Jing opened her mouth and nodded. There is indeed such a possibility, but I believe that now is not the time to investigate this matter. What? Sect Master Qin, should be considering right now is how to lead your disciples away. He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "The situation is dangerous. I ask that Sect Master Qin disregard past enmity and help the South Sea Sword Sect. As long as Sect Master extends a helping hand, the South Sea Sword Sect will repay you generously. Moreover, I guarantee that after today, I will no longer be your enemy." They were in a perilous situation. At any moment, a calamity could descend upon them. Su Jing didn't have time to bargain or think about the pros and cons. He directly expressed his greatest sincerity, hoping that Qin Yu would nod. He had already personally experienced the potent killing strength of a top-grade sword demon. If Qin Yu refused, everyone in the South Sea Sword Sect, including him, would face a great calamity. In this silent silence, each day seemed like a year. Right at this moment, Su Jing's lips trembled. Just as he was about to say something, Qin Yu suddenly said, "Elder Su's words are too serious. There is no conflict between the South Sea Sword Sect and my heaven-splitting sword sect to begin with, so we are naturally not enemies." "Who?" Su Jing let out a long breath. He revealed a look of gratitude and nodded. "Sect Master Qin is right. I have misspoken. Please don't blame me." Qin Yu lifted a hand and pointed. "We've arrived." In front of them, the disciples of the South Sea Sword Sect had fallen into a bitter battle. There was a great disparity between the strength of a high-grade sword demon and a top-grade sword demon. But to these disciples, they were still difficult opponents to contend with. In particular, some of their squad members had died, and most of them had been wounded. Even though they had already experienced fighting with a high-grade sword demon before, in addition to their explosive strength in this desperate situation, there were still casualties. Now, the South Sea Sword Sect only had 7 disciples left, and 3 of them would remain here forever. Su Jing's eyes turned red. He roared and slashed out with his sword. The vast sea sword art slashed out, killing several high-grade sword demons where they stood. Elder, Jin Hua and the others were overjoyed before falling into sadness. Qin Yu said, "Elder Su, we should leave immediately." It was only then that the South Sea Sword Sect disciples saw Qin Yu standing not too far away. They subconsciously widened their eyes. They clearly couldn't understand why they would see the sect master of the heaven-splitting sword sect here. "Between us, shouldn't we be enraged and draw our swords at each other? What was going on here?" Su Jing said in a low voice, "The reason I was able to rush over to save you is all thanks to Sect Master Qin's help. You are not to be insolent. Hurry and collect the corpses of our companions. We are leaving this place." Soon, the group retreated from Sword Prison. Qin Yu was at the very back of the group. He didn't need to turn his head to feel the icy cold gazes coming from the darkness. The journey was incomparably smooth. The South Sea Sword Sect disciples suspected that they had suddenly switched maps. If it weren't for the incomparably oppressive darkness around them, they really would have suspected that they were still deep within Sword Prison. It was too quiet, so quiet that there was no movement at all. All that could be heard was the sound of their rapid movements colliding with the air. Su Jing relaxed. He could now confirm that the heaven-splitting sword sect did have some methods that could deter the sword demons in Sword Prison. But he had never heard of the heaven-splitting sword sect having such a method before. Otherwise, if they really had such a divine skill, how could the heaven-splitting sword sect have been so easily destroyed in the past? He couldn't figure it out, but that wasn't important. What was important was that the South Sea Sword Sect had to tightly cling onto the thigh of the heaven-splitting sword sect. This was their only path of survival. They saw Zhang Sheshan and the others. "Sect Master." The fish belly squad came up to them, and they all looked relieved. Just now, although it was still quiet, they felt that the darkness had become even more terrifying, as if a terrifying sword demon could leap out at any moment and tear them to shreds. But as Qin Yu appeared, This terrifying feeling rapidly vanished. Qin Yu relaxed. He nodded towards the underdog squad. This is the South Sea Sword Sect's elder Su Jing. Zhang Sheshan and the others revealed looks of surprise. It was clear they hadn't regained their composure yet. They stiffened for a moment before bowing. Luckily, Su Jing's skin was thick enough. In addition to the tense situation, she pretended not to see anything. She nodded towards Zhang Sheshan and the others. This time it was all thanks to Sect Master Qin's help that the South Sea Sword Sect was able to turn the crisis around. Qin Yu guessed Su Jing's thoughts and explained the situation once more. One reason was to compliment Qin Yu and let him shine in front of his disciples. The second reason was because he was worried that Qin Yu would change his mind, so he used this chance to clarify things so that Qin Yu couldn't change his mind. Needless to say, after Zhang Sheshan and the others heard this, their gazes were truly refreshing. Qin Yu coughed. "Elder Su, let's talk business." Su Jing cupped her hands together. "From this moment on, the entire South Sea Sword Sect will obey Sect Master Qin's commands." This elder Su seemed solemn and earnest on the surface, as if he wasn't easy to approach. But in truth, he was a wonderful person. Qin Yu waved his hand. "As I said before, I don't know much about Sword Prison. If Elder Su has any suggestions, please feel free to speak them." Seeing that he didn't seem to be evading, Su Jing thought for a moment and said, "The situation of Sword Prison going out of control has occurred before. In the end, the sword cultivators that survived were able to retreat to the shallow layers of Sword Prison and join forces with the outside world to forcefully break through Sword Prison's blockade." He looked at Qin Yu. "So, right now, our best choice is to gather together the various large sword cultivators. We must protect their lives as much as possible. This is because the blockade of Sword Prison is extremely difficult to break, and attacking from the inside is far better than attacking from the outside. The more sword cultivators that survive, the faster we can break through the blockade." He explained in a serious tone. This was because, in a strict sense, besides the South Sea Sword Sect, the 10 sword sects had an unresolvable grudge with the Heaven-splitting Sword Sect. As the saying went, when a whale falls, all things grow. If this saying could be applied to the Heaven-splitting Sword Sect in the past, it was also true. In the great calamity of the past, the Heaven-splitting Sword Sect was destroyed along with it. It was unknown just how many sword cultivators had eaten their fill and obtained tremendous benefits. Thinking back to how the Heavenly Cycle Sword Sect had been besieged by wandering cultivators and their ancestral hall had been destroyed, one could guess that the various sword sects hadn't played a particularly glorious role in this matter. As the sect master of the Heaven-splitting Sword Sect, it was hard to say what Qin Yu's attitude towards the various sword sects of Swallow Mountain was like. Qin Yu guessed Su Jing's thoughts, but he didn't explain. He shook his head. "There is no need to trouble yourself." Su Jing panicked. "Sect Master Qin, now is not the time to be swayed by emotions." Qin Yu raised a hand to interrupt her. He looked at her and lightly said, "In the depths of Sword Prison, besides you and the Heaven-splitting Sword Sect, there aren't many people left alive." Su Jing stiffened. Qin Yu said, "This is a matter of life and death. My sect will not cut off my own path of survival because of some past grudges." Su Jing let out a long breath. "I believe in Sect Master Qin's judgment." His heart was heavy, but it wasn't as heavy as it appeared on the surface. The South Sea Sword Sect was one of the 10 sword sects. In Swallow Mountain, their strength was naturally in the top echelon. Through their own judgment, they were able to estimate that the various sword sects had entered the depths of Sword Prison at roughly the same time. In just half a day, the casualties had been so disastrous. The consequences of Sword Prison going out of control this time were far more tragic than he had imagined. This time, just how many peerless grade sword demons had escaped from Sword Prison's core layer. And most importantly, the great sword sect's sword cultivators had nearly been completely annihilated. If so, Could they still forcefully open Sword Prison like before? Su Jing didn't have much confidence in this. His eyes subconsciously fell onto Qin. Now, he could only place his hopes on the astonishing performance of the heaven-splitting sword sect. He had clearly seen what happened just now. After Qin left, the heaven-splitting sword sect's sword cultivators had remained where they were, waiting. During this period of time, they hadn't suffered any attacks at all. This meant that the heaven-splitting sword sect really did have a way to deter the sword demons in Sword Prison, and it wasn't sect Master Qin's own ability. This was extremely important. If the heaven-splitting sword sect was willing to use this method. Thinking of this, Su Jing bitterly smiled and decisively dispelled this thought. If their statuses were reversed, would the South Sea Sword sect be willing to share this divine skill they obtained? In their dreams, it was best not to think too optimistically about others. It was already good enough that they could cling onto the thigh of the heaven-splitting sword sect. If they provoked Qin, then the South Sea Sword sect and the others would all be finished. Taking a deep breath, Su Jing said, "If that's the case, then Sect Master Qin, let's hurry back to the shallow layer of Sword Prison. Perhaps we can save some people along the way." The environment of Sword Prison made it so that high-grade sword demons rarely entered the shallow layer. This involved the strength and weakness of the sword aura within Sword Prison. The sword faction of Swallow Ran Mountain had done some serious research on this. After Sword Prison went out of control, some of their past experiences weren't useful anymore. But entering the shallow layer of Sword Prison could greatly reduce the number of attacks from high-grade sword demons. In particular, the most terrifying peerless sword demons. In past records, the sword cultivators that survived Sword Prison when out of control did, so because they were in the shallow layer of Sword Prison. There were very few peerless sword demons that attacked. Qin looked at Su Jing and shook his head. "We won't go to the shallow layer." Su Jing's complexion changed. "Elder Su, if you are willing to believe in me, then follow behind the heaven-splitting sword sect. We will continue deeper into Sword Prison. Otherwise, we will part ways here. You can lead the disciples of the South Sea Sword sect to the shallow layer of Sword Prison." Su Jing was silent for several breaths of time. Then he said bitterly, "Sect Master Qin, I have no intention of offending you, but can you give me an explanation? I am not alone. There are also these disciples. They are the most outstanding disciples of the South Sea Sword sect, the future of the Sword sect. I must be careful. I know that this request is too presumptuous. Consider this as me owing Sect Master a favor. In the future, if you have any requests, Su Jing will not refuse." Qin glanced at him. He lightly said, "The prison going out of control this time is different from the past. The shallow layer of Sword Prison might not be safe." Chapter 17:16. Yen Ran Mountain was in chaos. Small Sword Sect might not have spared no expense to light a soul lamp for every elite disciple in the ancestral hall. But for Great Sword Sect, this was only a basic operation. Therefore, even if they lost contact with Sword Prison, the soul lamps would not lie. Every extinguished lamp represented the death of a disciple. And now, the soul lamps left in the ancestral hall by the major sword sects that had entered Sword Prison were almost all extinguished. The matter was too serious, so serious that it was impossible to keep it a secret. The news had spread throughout Yen Ran Mountain, causing an uproar. The major sword sects were heartbroken and demanded that the Sword Master Guild investigate what had happened in Sword Prison and give them an explanation. The small sword sect disciples fell into a state of panic. Even the big sword sect's sword cultivators had suffered heavy casualties, not to mention the sword cultivators under them. The fact that Sword Prison had gone out of control had become an open secret. But this time, the consequences of Sword Prison going out of control were much more serious than any of the previous ones. A terrifying thought appeared in the minds of the major sword cultivators of Yen Ran Mountain. With so many sword cultivators dying, could they work together to forcefully open Sword Prison like before? If they could not, then none of the sword cultivators who entered would survive. This would become the most tragic opening of Sword Prison in the history of Yen Ran Mountain, and the Sword Master Guild, who had strongly advocated for this, would have to bear the responsibility. South Sea Sword Sect was the first to bear the brunt. In another secret meeting of the Sword Master Guild, the Spring Wind Sword Sect proposed the worst-case scenario, which was to fail in the rescue, and all the sword cultivators in Sword Prison dying, the resulting consequences, and the Sword Master Guild's response. The atmosphere was extremely heavy. The South Sea Sword Sect's leader, Wei Hung, had a gloomy face the entire time, not saying a word. The cold gazes from all around him made him feel great pressure. Although everyone knew that the sudden opening of the Sword Sect examination was the chilling Frost Sword Sect's idea, they were the first to propose it. And as an outsider, the South Sea Sword Sect's relationship with the local sword sects of Yen Ran Mountain had always been very subtle. If this matter was not handled well, the South Sea Sword Sect would be pushed out and become the scapegoat for the entire matter. And Wei Hung would not allow such a situation to happen. The Sword Master Guild ended, and all the sword masters stood up to leave, their expressions grave, the coldness rising around them. Putting aside the final outcome of this matter, it was an undeniable fact that the 10 sword sects did not manage to escape and suffered heavy losses in the Sword Prison. Sect Master Han, please wait a moment. I have something to discuss with you. Wei Hung suddenly spoke, attracting the attention of the crowd. Han Jingyang, who had been in charge of the chilling Frost Sword Sect for over 1,000 years, remained calm. All right. His expression didn't reveal the slightest bit of emotion. Soon, Han Jingyang and Wei Hung came to a quiet room one after another. Wei Hung took a step forward, and his sword breath severed the rules, isolating this place. He said coldly, Sect Leader Han, you have to give me an explanation for the matter of Sword Prison going out of control. Han Jingyang frowned. Sect Master Wei, you forgot yourself. Lost composure? Wei Hung laughed coldly. Han Jingyang, do you think I still have the mood to care about these things? His eyes were cold as he looked straight at them. The opening of the Sword Prison was Sect Master Han's decision to use it against the heaven-splitting Sword Sect. I have no doubt about this. But now that the situation in Sword Prison has deteriorated to such a degree, and the South Sea Sword Sect has become the target of public criticism, Sect Master Han must give me an explanation. Just what is going on? Han Jingyang's eyebrows furrowed even tighter, a chill on his face. Sect Master Wei, be careful with your words. The changes in the Sword Prison have nothing to do with the chilling Frost Sword Sect. If you have such an attitude, then there is nothing left to say between us. Wei Hung took a deep breath. Sect Master Han, are you saying that you want to draw a clear line between yourself and my South Sea Sword Sect? Han Jingyang lightly said, there has never been any connection between the chilling Frost Sword Sect and the South Sea Sword Sect. Very good. Wei Heng's complexion was ice cold. Sect Master Han, the favor you owe the chilling Frost Sword Sect will be erased today. When our two sects meet in the future, we will no longer be friends. If they were no longer friends, then it was impossible for them to be strangers. When they met in the future, they would use their own methods. If you can hammer me down, then that is your ability. Otherwise, just wait to be lying on the ground. These words signified that the two great sword sects had completely shed all pretense of cordiality. It wasn't that Wei Hung was too impulsive and didn't understand the meaning of forbearance, but that the current situation was already very clear. The chilling Frost Sword Sect was prepared to abandon the South Sea Sword Sect and push them out as scapegoats to bear the wrath of the great sword sects of Swallow Ran Mountain. As for the changes in the Sword Prison, Wei Hung didn't believe a single word that Han Jingyang said. Others might not know the background of the chilling Frost Sword Sect, but he knew it very well. This matter was definitely related to them. In other words, the South Sea sword sect had been completely sold out from the very beginning. Since that was the case, if they didn't turn hostile now, were they just waiting to be trampled on a few more times? Han Jingyang was expressionless. Sect Master Wei, you are not at peace today. I will not lower myself to your level. Humph. Wei Hung flicked his sleeves and left. After a moment, Han Jingyang walked out of the quiet room. The chilling frost sword sect, sword cultivators waiting outside hurried over. Sect Master, what happened? I saw Wei Hung come out in a rage just now. He didn't even pay attention to me. An elder said with a frown. Han Jingyang said, Sect Master Wei is not in a good mood because of the changes in the sword prison. He had a small argument with me. Just ignore him for now. Come, let's go to the entrance of the sword prison. Swoosh! The chilling frost sword sect soared into the sky. In reality, the situation of the sword prison going out of control this time was beyond Han Jingyang's expectations. It directly caused an elder and 12 outstanding disciples to fall into a situation of certain death. But this also meant that the seal of the core layer of the sword prison had been completely opened. The sealed artifact was really about to be born. Han Jingyang had waited for this day for countless years. Among the cultivators of the world, sword cultivators were the most lethal. They could even fight above their level, and everyone in the world was envious of them. But in reality, the situation of sword cultivators was extremely poor. It was so poor that there was not a single Emperor Realm cultivator among the millions of sword cultivators in the divine continent of the Central Wasteland. The high and lofty threshold of the Celestial Realm was like a natural chasm that cut off the possibility of all sword cultivators in the world moving forward. Sword cultivators had no Emperor Realm, and Han Jingyang wanted to break this curse and become the #1 sword cultivator in the world. And now the opportunity had finally arrived. The secret of Yanran Mountain had been passed down from generation to generation by the chilling frost sword sect master, and they had made countless preparations for it. As long as the seal was broken and the sealed artifact was released, one could seize it and refine it to break through their current cultivation bottleneck. At the entrance of the sword prison, countless sword cultivators had gathered from all directions. All of them had solemn expressions as they looked at the black hole that led underground. Not far away, Wei Hung stood in front of a giant stone wall. He looked up at the red and blue rolls that were formed by light. He frowned slightly, a trace of hesitation on his face. He summoned a South Sea sword sect disciple and whispered a few words to him. The disciple then turned and left in a hurry. As the news of the sword prison going out of control was confirmed, and the sword cultivators of the various sword sects suffered heavy casualties, the 2 stone rolls were no longer paid attention to. After all, what was the point of the rolls when everyone was dead? It was obvious that the sword sect examination this time was useless. It was difficult to come out alive, so who would have the mood to fight for a ranking? But the South Sea sword sect master, Wei Hung, was one of the big shots of the 10 sword sects. His appearance attracted a large wave of attention. So when the 2 rolls were scanned, someone quickly discovered that something was wrong. A sword cultivator exclaimed softly, pointing at the sword prison's azure roll. Heaven-splitting sword sect. That's right, the name of the heaven-splitting sword sect had appeared in the 7th place on the azure roll. Because of the sword prison going out of control, this name that had received the most attention in this sword sect examination had almost been forgotten. Now, it suddenly appeared on the roll, leaving many people in a daze. Before the sword prison opened, many people had been waiting to see the heaven-splitting sword sect's bad luck. But who knew that things would develop to this point? It was hard to say what would happen to the heaven-splitting sword sect. It was said that even the ancestral hall had not been officially restored, so they naturally had no soul lamp to use as a reference. But the other sword sects of Yanran Mountain had clearly suffered a great loss. That's not right. The depth of the sword prison is calculated according to the deepest point. Even if you retreat, it won't be empty. That's right. That's the rule. The heaven-splitting sword sect didn't even enter the top 100 before, but now they're in the 7th place. That means they're continuing to venture deeper into the sword prison. At this moment, there was a sudden change in the rankings on the Azure roll. The heaven-splitting sword sect's ranking moved up a step. Under everyone's watchful eyes, it was now in the 6th place. A solid hammer. The heaven-splitting sword sect was indeed continuing to explore the sword prison. This knowledge made the countless sword cultivators outside the sword prison dizzy for at least 3 seconds. What was going on? Under such circumstances, everyone wanted to run as far as they could and retreat to the shallow layer of the sword prison. Who knew they might have a chance of survival? The heaven-splitting sword sect was actually doing the opposite? Not only that, but they were advancing very quickly. How long had it been? And they'd already climbed to the 6th place. They must be crazy. They were willing to sacrifice their lives for the ranking? Or did the heaven-splitting sword sect not know the horror of the sword prison going out of control? That couldn't be right. Even if they had just been restored, they still had a Tao protector, so they shouldn't be unfamiliar with the history of Swallow Ran Mountain. This didn't make sense at all. No one could figure it out. Hu Jiming was awakened by the clamor in his ears. Then he felt many eyes constantly falling on him. Pity, sympathy, he furrowed his brows. After listening to a few words, he suddenly looked up at the Azure Sword Prison's ranking. Indeed, in the 6th place, he saw the name of the heaven-splitting sword sect. Listening to those whispers, Hu Jiming's complexion paled. This was because the sword cultivators outside the sword prison had finally found a reasonable explanation for what was happening in front of them. The heaven-splitting sword sect master had personally led a team into the sword prison. In order to explore the sword prison, one needed to ensure that all the team members were alive. Only then could their positions be calculated by the Jade tokens and be included in the results. For example, if 11 of the team members died and only one remained, then the heaven-splitting sword sect master would be able to protect him and continue exploring the sword prison with his extraordinary strength. As long as they avoided Sword Demon and didn't fight him, this was indeed possible. And this in itself could be considered a loophole in the sword sect's examination. But in normal circumstances, the disciples that participated in the sword sect's examination were all outstanding disciples of their respective sections. No one would cheat in such a way. Even the death of a single disciple was heartbreaking, let alone 8 or 10. But the heaven-splitting sword sect was different. They had temporarily recruited wandering cultivators to form a small team. Even if all of them died, they wouldn't feel any pain at all. And it just so happened that in this small team, besides Zhang Xiashan, the other 11 were all random wandering cultivators. These people all came from the lowest rungs of society, and their cultivations were low. In Swallow Ran Mountain, they were the weakest group. Even if they all died in the sword prison, they wouldn't need to worry that this would provoke trouble. Everything seemed to make sense now. No wonder the heaven-splitting sword sect would form such a small team. Now that he looked at it, it wasn't a stupid move at all. It was clearly sharp and ruthless to the extreme. Hu Jiming didn't want to believe this. But as he looked at the Azure Sword Prison's ranking, the 6th place heaven-splitting sword sect, no, it was now the 5th place. Once again, it was confirmed. The heaven-splitting sword sect was indeed going against the trend to explore the sword prison. Apart from this possibility, there was no other explanation. He closed his eyes. His face was slightly pale and full of pain. Suddenly, another exclamation sounded. No, look, the South Sea Sword Sect's ranking on the Azure roll, 6th place, right behind the heaven-splitting sword sect. And just now it was ranked 7th. That's right, 7th place. Everyone looked at each other. The shock and astonishment on their faces showed that they had not seen wrong. And now, the South Sea Sword Sect was ranked 6th. In other words, apart from the heaven-splitting sword sect, it was also continuing to explore the sword prison. What was going on? If it was just the heaven-splitting sword sect, they could still find an explanation. But what about the South Sea sword sect? The sword cultivators outside the sword prison suddenly realized that things were a little different from what they had imagined. Chapter 17:12. The Sword Demon is Coming. Chapter 17:17. The chilling frost sword sect is here. It's Sect Master Han. Sure. Sect Master Han doesn't like noise. Outside the sword prison, there was a sudden silence, but the eyes of the sword cultivators brightened. Someone had already started sending messages to inform the various sects of the changes on the list. Han Jingyang's eyes flashed. He turned and ordered, "Go investigate this matter." He had already seen the changes in the sword prison's list from far away. To be honest, Han Jingyang no longer cared about the heaven-splitting sword sect. So what if they reopened the sect? So what if their path protector was mysterious and powerful? As long as he successfully obtained the sealed item, he would be the #1 sword cultivator in the world. With the killing power of a sword cultivator, he could even fight a true emperor at the half-step emperor level. At that time, he would have nothing to fear in the world. But the sword prison incident needed a perfect scapegoat. Only then could the chilling frost sword sect be cleared of all blame. Otherwise, it would always be a stain. The scene in front of Han Jingyang gave him a better direction to choose from. Soon, the chilling frost sword sect elder returned with a surprised and puzzled expression. He whispered in Han Jingyang's ear. Han Jingyang frowned. "Are you sure?" The elder said in a low voice, "I also felt it was strange. I had people confirm it repeatedly. It was indeed so." Han Jingyang's eyes flashed with coldness. His intuition told him that the unexpected change in the sword prison had something to do with this matter. The heaven-splitting sword sect. Could it be? Thinking of something, Han Jingyang's eyes turned even colder. He took a step forward and appeared beside the list. He looked straight at Wei Hung and said slowly, "Sect Master Wei, can you explain to me why the South Sea Sword Sect has only lost 5 disciples and Elder Su Jing is safe and sound?" The cold voice spread out. The sword cultivators outside the sword prison were slightly startled. They looked at the South Sea Sword Sect with surprise. The sword cultivators of the major sects in the sword prison were almost all dead. This was already a fact. The South Sea Sword Sect actually managed to preserve more than half of their disciples. This was clearly not normal. It was not that the sword cultivators were so dark that they could not bear to see others alive. It was just that this matter did not make sense. All the major sword sects had entered the depths of the sword prison and were in the same environment. Could it be that they were really lucky and escaped this calamity? Presently, practically all the sword cultivators had perished, and only the South Sea Sword Sect was still alive. This was absolutely not something that could be explained with good luck. Moreover, just now, through the sword prison explorers ranking, everyone had confirmed one thing. The South Sea Sword Sect was still exploring the depths of the sword prison. Putting it together with this matter, there was no need to think about it at all. One look was enough to tell that there was definitely something wrong with this matter. Wei Hung frowned. What does Sect Master Han mean? Han Jingyang was expressionless. Instead of answering, he asked, "Why would the South Sea Sword Sect and the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect work together? Why are they working together to explore the sword prison and go deeper? And why is it that when sword prison went out of control, the 13 people of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect, including Sect Master Qinyu, are still completely unscathed, without a single casualty?" The 2 consecutive questions were like boulders that smashed into the lake in everyone's heart. Countless sword cultivators widened their eyes in disbelief. What does that mean? The heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect was still alive, and not a single person had died? What a joke! Before they entered the sword prison, Many sword cultivators had seen them with their own eyes. There were even many members of this squad that were recognized as the weakest and most ordinary wandering cultivators. In terms of overall strength, let alone the great sword sects, they were far inferior to even some small sword sections. But now the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect was ranked 5th on the exploration rankings. They had absolutely entered the deeper levels of the sword prison. Up until now, not a single person had died. Was this publicly mocking the intelligence of the great sword sects of Swallow Ran Mountain? There was a problem. There was definitely a problem. And now, the people of the South Sea Sword Sect were actually working together with the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect. The thick smell of a conspiracy shrouded everyone. Gloomy expressions appeared on the faces of all the sword cultivators. Whoosh, whoosh, sword phantoms held forwards, arriving at the entrance to the sword prison. Within Swallow Ran Mountain, almost all of the top-ranked sword sects had arrived. Sect Master Han, do you have any proof of what you say? The Eastern Mountain Sword Master asked, his eyes cold. He had a disciple that was in the Eastern Mountain Sword Sect's entrance examination team. Now, it was confirmed that he had perished. Han Jingyang's eyes were calm as he swept his eyes over everyone. I have already ordered people to retrieve the records of the wanted tokens. If anyone has any doubts, you can verify them yourselves. The space fell deathly silent. No one believed that the Frosty Frost Sword sect would come up with such a clumsy lie that could be easily seen through. But the verification still had to be carried out. The Eastern Mountain Sword Master turned and left. I will go with you. I will also go. Several sword path powerhouses of Swallow Ran Mountain turned and left at the same time. Soon they returned. There was no need to say anything. From their complexions, everyone knew that the truth was as the Frosty Frost Sword Sect said. The space became even more deathly still. The Eastern Mountain Sword Master's eyes were ice cold. Sect Master Wei Hung, how will you explain this matter? Shua! Everyone's eyes gathered on him. Wei Hung had a calm expression. The connection between the outside world and sword prison has long been severed. I do not know what happened, so how can I explain it to everyone? He had learned of what the Frosty Frost Sword Sect said earlier and was already mentally prepared. Heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect, it was obvious that the reason the people of the South Sea Sword Sect were still alive was because of them. This caused Wei Hang's mood to be a bit complicated. After all, not too long ago, the two sides had stood on opposite sides. The Frosty Frost Sword Sect that he had thought to be an ally had been ruthlessly stabbed in the back, and the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect that he viewed as an enemy had actually come to rescue them. The ways of the world were truly hard to fathom. As for now, the investigation from the various great sword sects was indeed troublesome. But Wei Hung wasn't afraid. First of all, fear was useless. Secondly, did the Frosty Frost Sword Sect really think that it would be so easy to push the South Sea Sword Sect out to take the brunt of the thunder? I can choose not to use braids, but I have to have them in my hands. If I really push them too far, I'll just openly fight them and your Frosty Frost Sword Sect can forget about peace. The Eastern Mountain Sword Master took a deep breath and pointed towards Sword Prison. The only son of a good friend of mine entered my sect and died here today. If this matter is related to the South Sea Sword Sect and the Heaven-Splitting Swordsmanship Sect, I will not let this matter rest. Eastern Mountain Sword Master, be careful with your words. The cry of swords rose up. Hu Jiming flew into the air and cupped his hands towards everyone. I am now a protector of the Heaven-Splitting Swordsmanship Sect. I must protect the reputation of the Sword Sect. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the first sentence. Moreover, he had a good reason to do so. Straightening his back, Hu Jiming said, Eastern Mountain Sword Master, seniors of the Sword Sect, there is something you should all be clear about. The Sword Sect examination this time has come very suddenly. The Heaven-Splitting Swordsmanship Sect has no idea about it. Because we have just been restored, we don't even have enough disciples to take the examination. Let me ask you, under such circumstances, what does the accident in Sword Prison have to do with the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect? Secondly, as sect leader Wei has said, Sword Prison has been cut off from the outside world. None of us know what has happened in Sword Prison. It is meaningless to speculate now. Instead of wasting time here, it is better to think of a way to open Sword Prison as soon as possible and rescue our fellow Taoists trapped within. Perhaps then we will know what has happened. Wei Hung praised in his heart. To be able to have such a cultivation as a loose cultivator, he was indeed something. These words were very true. Saving people was the consensus of all the sword sects. He nodded and said, I believe that what Protector who says is correct. The South Sea Sword Sect is willing to contribute its strength to the rescue. The Eastern Mountain Sword Master revealed a thoughtful expression. He took a deep breath and nodded. Good. Then we will wait until Sword Prison is reopened before investigating this matter. But I will say the same thing. No matter who is involved in this matter, as long as I find out who it is, I will not tolerate it. Han Jingyang was expressionless, but he sneered inwardly. Since the sealed object was about to come out, there was no way the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect could escape. If the South Sea Sword sect tied themselves to them, that was the same as seeking their own doom. Deep within Sword Prison, it was even darker underground. Even though the walls were covered with glowing moss, it was unable to illuminate the surrounding area. It was like there was some invisible strength in this darkness that swallowed up all light, leaving behind only endless darkness. Qin Yu walked in front. The small fry squad behind him spread out, surrounding the South Sea Sword Sect group. At the start, Jin Hua and the other South Sea Sword Sect disciples were dissatisfied with this. Why? With the strength of the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect group, did they really think they could protect them? But soon they extinguished these thoughts. As they looked at the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect group, they revealed complex expressions. They finally understood why Elder Su Jing had decided to lead them deeper into Sword Prison just because of Qin Yu's words. It was too quiet. The current depths of Sword Prison were like a calm pool of water in the middle of the night without the slightest ripple. Those terrifying, murderous, and cruel sword demons were nowhere to be seen. Ever since the sword cultivators of the two sects gathered here, they hadn't encountered a single one. There were only two possibilities. The first was that the sword demons had vanished, but that was clearly impossible. And the second was that the sword demons didn't dare to approach. No matter what the reason was, the situation was clear. They feared the sword cultivators of the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect. It definitely wasn't because of their cultivation, but because they carried something on their bodies that terrified the sword demons. Some of the South Sea Sword sect disciples let out sighs of relief, joy on their faces. Some people felt that the silence in front of them was extremely taunting. It was like a stone was placed across their chests, making it hard for them to breathe. Jin Hua took a deep breath. He suddenly said, Sect Master Qin. In the quiet sword prison, this voice was abrupt. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows and turned to look. Jin Hua said in a low voice, I cannot understand. Since the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect has a treasure that can restrain the sword demons, why didn't they save them before? There are thousands of sword cultivators in Sword Prison right now. They shouldn't have all died. Shut up, Su Jing angrily shouted. Jin Hua immediately apologized to Sect Master Qin. Jin Hua took a deep breath. Elder, this disciple has something to ask, so I ask for your forgiveness. If Sect Master Qin is willing to answer, Jin Hua can leave the group to fend for himself and apologize to Sect Master. Insolence! Su Jing lifted a hand. Vast sea sword breath erupted. Elder, don't! A female disciple desperately stood in front of Jin Hua. Senior apprentice, Sister Chengshan has died. She signed a heart-linking contract with senior apprentice Brother Jin Hua. Senior apprentice Brother Jin Hua was too grief-stricken and offended Sect Master Qin. She had a pleading look on her face. Sect Master Qin, please be magnanimous and don't lower yourself to senior apprentice Brother Jin Hua's level. He was too grief-stricken and confused. Qin Yu turned around and continued forwards. Jin Hua wanted to say something more, but he was tightly hugged by the female cultivator. Her eyes were red as she shook her head at him. Su Jing walked over. Jin Hua, the dead cannot be brought back to life. I understand your feelings, but this will be the last time. Otherwise, there will be no need for Sect Master Qin to do anything. I will personally kill you to avoid implicating others. Yes, Elder. At this time, Qin Yu suddenly stopped. He calmly looked at the darkness in front of him. In his ears, he could hear the sounds of suppressed breathing, restlessness, unease, panic, as well as a burning heat that couldn't be concealed. As he thought, even a simple method couldn't scare them away. Otherwise, this trip to Sword Prison would have been far too simple. Qin Yu took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. He said, "Prepare yourselves. The sword demons are coming." Without hesitation, he stepped forwards. In the deep darkness ahead, there was a deep roar. Chapter 1718. Sword demons walked out from the darkness. Magma seemed to flow in the depths of their crimson eyes, and a terrifying sword aura surged in the air. High-ranked. Everywhere he looked, without exception, was a high-ranked sword devil. But this wasn't the most terrifying thing. What was most terrifying was that there were at least 10 peerless sword demons amongst the sword demons. Their cold and tyrannical eyes shrouded everyone. It was like they were facing an abyss that would swallow them up in the next moment. Those from the South Sea Sword Sect, including Elder Su Jing, all paled. Not to mention 10 peerless sword demons. Just these high-grade sword demons in front of them weren't existences they could contend with. To say that many ants could bite an elephant to death was to underestimate the strength of these high-grade sword demons. But this was the general meaning. Even if they were to rush at them, they would still die. Senior apprentice brother, I'm scared. The female sword cultivator in front of Jin Hua was filled with fear. Jin Hua rubbed her head. Junior apprentice sister, don't be afraid. He took a deep breath. Elder Su, let us leave. Since the sword demons had appeared, this meant that the heaven-splitting sword sect's deterrent methods had lost their effectiveness. Su Jing hesitated. At this time, Qin Yu suddenly said, "You can take out the trump card that the great elder gave you." Trump card? The heaven-splitting sword sect's sword cultivators actually had a trump card? Su Jing and the others were pleasantly surprised. Yes, sect master. Zhang Xiashan and the others nodded. They lifted their hands and pressed down between their eyebrows. Their fingertips pierced through the flesh, revealing the white bones hidden beneath. Blood gushed out from the wounds. But in the next moment, it was evaporated by a sudden burst of light. Beneath the high temperature, the flesh and blood were dried and charred. One could see that between the white bones between their eyebrows, there were runes carved into them. When their flesh and blood were exposed to the air, they were activated. The light that gushed out didn't spread out in all directions. Rather, it was pulled by an invisible strength and gathered together. Above everyone's heads, it condensed into a giant sword of light. It was like a great sun beneath the earth, releasing boundless sword might. The sword demons that appeared in front of them were exposed to the light of the sword of light. They immediately emitted shrill howls, their bodies constantly emitting black smoke. The several high-grade sword demons closest to them screamed miserably as they were illuminated by the light. So this was the trump card that Little Meaty had given him. It looked powerful indeed. Qin Yu exclaimed inwardly, but he didn't reveal any of this on his face. He put on a confident expression and turned to look at Zhang Xiashan. Zhang Xiashan nodded lightly. Let's go. Qin Yu was the first to step forward. The small team of weaklings with light swords above their heads followed closely behind. The members of the South Sea Sword sect had long since been stunned into a daze. They looked at the sword of light above their heads, then at the screaming sword demon on the other side, their hearts filled with disbelief. To be able to do this, powerful, really too powerful. Was this the true power of the heaven-splitting sword sect? Qin Yu's expression was calm. A thoughtful look appeared in his eyes, and then it gradually turned to firm resolve. When he saw the trump cards that Zhang Sheshan and the others took out, he understood that there must be a reason why Little Meaty wanted him to explore the depths of the sword prison. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put in so much effort. He raised his head and looked at the dazzling light soared above his head. The sword demon's screams of pain and anguish were the best proof of its power. Even if it was Little Meaty, it wouldn't be simple for her to arrange such a powerful method on Zhang Sheshan and the others. After all, they also had to consider their strength. It had to be known that the more powerful a trump card was, the more powerful it needed to be. To balance these 2 points was bound to be very troublesome. Thus, there must be a reason why he had to go to the depths of the sword prison. Outside the entrance of the sword prison, the Sword Master Guild had already tried to forcefully open the seal of the sword prison once. Everything within thousands of meters had been turned to dust, and this was in the preparations they had made in advance to prevent the shockwaves from spreading. Otherwise, the surrounding mountain peaks would have been torn apart. But unfortunately, the entrance of the sword prison was still undamaged. The seal didn't budge at all. This result caused the hearts of all the anxious sword cultivators who had joined in the rescue mission to turn cold. With lives at stake, where would they find the time to try? The Sword Master Guild had nearly used their strongest method this time. In the previous records, the entrance of the sword prison had been sealed using a similar method. But today there was no effect at all. This left everyone in despair. Even though the Sword Master Guild had already seized the time to attempt a second rescue mission, the atmosphere outside the entrance of the sword prison was still extremely oppressive. The sword prison had lost contact for a long time. No one knew what kind of fear and despair the sword cultivators inside were experiencing. And the only thing that could let the sword cultivators outside know that there were still people alive inside the sword prison were the blue and red lists on the stone wall. The Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect and the South Sea Sword Sect were still going deeper into the sword prison. Now, they had climbed to first and second place. Therefore, this ranking had lost its meaning. After occupying the top spot, their ranking no longer moved. Thus, it was impossible to determine the current situation of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect and the South Sea Sword Sect. But soon, the situation changed again. Look at the red list. On the Sword Demon Killing list, the South Sea Sword Sect, which had been in 4th place for a long time, suddenly jumped to 3rd place. Gasps could be heard. The move up in the rankings meant that the South Sea Sword Sect had once again encountered the Sword Demon. And now, with the terrifying situation of the sword prison going out of control, the outcome of encountering the Sword Demon's attack could already be predicted. Wei Heng's expression was solemn as he stared at the red list on the stone wall. He was very afraid that he would soon receive a message from the ancestral hall. Suddenly, Wei Heng's eyes widened slightly. On the red list, the South Sea Sword Sect's name suddenly appeared in 2nd place. How long had it been? For their ranking to rise so quickly, it was clear that the sword demon they had encountered was definitely powerful. Wei Heng's expression became increasingly ugly. His hands and his sleeves could not help but tremble slightly. Although his heart ached for those disciples, with the foundation of the South Sea Sword Sect, even if they all died there, it would not affect them too much. But Su Jing was his only junior brother. The two had grown up together, and they had become disciples of their master to cultivate the Sword Tao. They had a deep relationship. Although they were not brothers, they were better than brothers. Thinking that it was because of his decision that Su Jing had fallen into such a desperate situation, Wei Hang's heart was filled with regret. Wei Hung wished that he was the one trapped in the sword prison at this moment. He closed his eyes, his heart filled with sorrow and defeat. He worked hard to adjust his state of mind, preparing to welcome the arrival of the grievous news. Time passed. In Wei Hang's mind, the various events of the past with his junior brother Su Jing constantly flashed through his mind. From relying on each other all those years ago to following their master to Yan Ran Mountain, facing hostility and supercilious looks as they stood firm step by step until they became one of the new 10 sword sects of Yan Ran Mountain. His junior brother had participated in every little thing. It could even be said that half of it was due to Su Jing, because many decisions that involved the future of the sect were made by the two of them after discussion. Holy shit, look at the red list. The South Sea Sword Sect has gone mad. So strong. Wei Hing opened his eyes and saw that the South Sea Sword Sect had reached the top of the hunting list, and this was the first time such a situation had happened. If the situation was different, Wei Hung would definitely be overjoyed and order the South Sea Sword Sect to congratulate them. But now, what meaning was there in that? So what if they were first on the red list? The faster their battle record rose, it meant that his junior brother and the others had encountered greater danger. Such a first place was not worth it. The Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect has entered the top 10. That's not strange. They were originally together with the South Sea Sword Sect. Before, all the great sword sects had people dying, but only they were fine. But now it can be said that the wheel of fortune has turned. Be careful with your words. Su Jing is Sect Master Wei's junior brother, and he is currently in sword prison. The two of them have a close relationship, so don't provoke trouble for yourself. 9th place, 8th place, 7th place. The Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect bravely advanced. In a short period of time, they squeezed into 2nd place, closely following behind the South Sea Sword Sect. I never thought that the small fry squad of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect would have such strength. Why do I feel that something is wrong? The change in the rankings of the two lists means that the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect and the South Sea Sword Sect still have the qualifications to participate. In other words, the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect's Sect Master Qinyu and the South Sea Sword Sect's Elder Su Jing haven't done anything yet. There was a sudden silence. The sword cultivators that had been paying attention to the changes in the rankings of the two lists suddenly regained their composure. Since Qinyu and Su Jing hadn't done anything, could this result have been achieved by the sword cultivators of the two sects themselves? What a joke! In the depths of sword prison, even the Tao protectors of the various great sword sects had died. Could these juniors possibly reach first place? That was impossible. It had to be said that the South Sea Sword Sect was one of the 10 sword sects. Perhaps they had prepared some great killing methods for their disciples. But the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect? If that small fry squad encountered several high-grade sword demons, they would all be finished. This didn't make sense. This didn't make sense at all. Wei Hang's thoughts stirred. He took a deep breath and took out the sect's messenger item. His expression was solemn as he probed it with his divine sense. Then he was stunned. The message had indeed come from the ancestral hall, but it wasn't bad news. Rather, it was a timely report that had been sent to him after he had given the order. Elder Su Jing and her 7 disciples had their soul lamps intact. This was the complete content of the message. Yet, it left Wei Hung unable to catch his breath, and his heart nearly stopped. The so-called great ups and downs, great sorrows and great joys, were truly unbearable. He forcefully suppressed the tumbling thoughts in his heart. A sharp light surged in Wei Hang's eyes. The Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. It wasn't difficult for him to find the reason. Before this, the South Sea Sword Sect had lost 5 disciples. But after they joined forces with the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect, there were no more casualties. The truth was right before his eyes. But why? Why was the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect able to be like fish in water in sword prison? Even if sword prison had gone out of control, it didn't affect them at all. Wei Heng couldn't find the reason, but he knew that after the matter of sword prison, no matter what the final outcome was, the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect would be in big trouble. The Heaven-Splitting Sword sect had to give an explanation for the many sword cultivators that had died. As for why, what happened before his eyes was enough reason. Besides, treasuring a jade ring was a crime. The existence of sword prison wasn't just to provide a place for the sword cultivators of Yan Ran Mountain to take a test. It was also the greatest fortuitous opportunity in Yan Ran Mountain. The Heaven-Splitting Sword sect had actually grasped the ability to be like fish in water in sword prison. This would definitely cause the other sword sects to be envious. And now, the South Sea Sword sect and the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect were already tied together. Wei Heng's expression flickered. I'll wait and see first. If the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect was doomed, perhaps the South Sea Sword sect could use this chance to escape the maelstrom. After all, given the current situation, it wasn't difficult to pin the blame of the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect for the reason that sword prison had gone out of control. Wei Heng had to admit that it was the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect that had saved Su Jing and the others. From the bottom of his heart, he was extremely grateful for this. But he was not just a sword cultivator. He was also the sect master of the South Sea Sword sect. He had to take responsibility for the lives of the thousands of sword cultivators in his sect. As for why he had to wait and not act now, it was because the Heaven-Splitting Sword sect's performance could be said to be strange and unpredictable. Even when sword prison had gone out of control, they had come out unscathed. Who could be sure how things would develop if they continued? Taking it slow, he could only treat it as giving himself a chance to be a grateful person. Chapter 1719. In the darkness, mournful wails filled the air, but the scene in front of them could only be described as strange. In the darkness, countless sword demons were constantly retreating. Beneath the illumination of the light, large swathes of black gas rose up from their bodies. They were surrounded by layers upon layers of sword demons. Their numbers were far fewer than the sword demons. The strength of both sides was simply not proportional. Above their heads, the light gathered into a sword, like a great sun beneath the earth. If the sword cultivators in the outside world who were dumbfounded by the changes in the two rankings could see the scene, their eyes would surely pop out of their sockets. There was no bloody slaughter at all. This was simply walking around with a sword of light above their heads, obtaining all the achievements. Let alone when sword prison was out of control, even in normal conditions, there was no sword cultivator that could pass through sword prison so easily. But at this time, Qin Yu's complexion wasn't relaxed. This was because, although the sword demons were still howling in pain beneath the illumination of the light, the speed at which they retreated was becoming slower and slower. Moreover, there were far too many sword demons, so many that they seemed endless. It was like they were lost in a vast sea. Batch after batch died, and there were no signs of the sword demons decreasing. Intuition told Qin Yu that the Sword of Light would continue to kill the sword demons. But their retreat would come to a halt at some point, because as the sword demons retreated slower and slower, the darkness within sword prison also became thicker and thicker. It was thick and viscous like ink. As it tumbled about, it seemed as if it could swallow everything. This thick darkness covered the surface of the sword demons' bodies. It was similar to a protective film, and now this film was becoming thicker and thicker. Qin Yu wasn't sure if the power of the Sword of Light could support them into the core of sword prison. The legend of Swallow Ran Mountain Seal that Su Jing spoke of could very well be the truth. And since Midi wanted him to enter deep into sword prison, perhaps her goal was the sealed artifact in the core of sword prison. A peerless immortal sword? Heaven-Splitting Sword sect. The sect's great array opened. Countless sword breaths wreaked havoc, turning the interior of the sect into a sea of swords. Not too far away, at an open-air round table, Meaty sat across from him. She picked up a cup of tea and took a sip. Hey, do you have to be so heartless? For better or worse, we are sisters. In the past, we even joined hands to play in the mortal world. A coquettish voice sounded out. It was soft and gentle, as if she had been wronged. As he spoke, he grabbed the teapot and poured himself a cup of tea. This hand was very beautiful. It actually gave people a feeling that it was perfect. In fact, every single vein on the skin of his hand was just right. The slightest addition, or the slightest change, was blasphemy against beauty. Can you drink it? Little Meaty was expressionless. It's my business whether I drink it or not, but it's your problem whether you give me the tea or not. After a pause, she giggled and said, Little Meat, I have to say, your name sounds very interesting. After all, as a ferromagnetic sister, you know me quite well. I was born to be a tomboy. Meaty looked up, her eyes cold. So, you want to eat me? Aya, don't be so direct. I just thought about it. I didn't do anything. It's enough for you to think about it. Don't be angry, Little Meat. I wouldn't dare to eat you. We're good sisters. I'm still waiting for you to save me. Little Meat put down the teacup. With a light smack, she said, Chinyu, you can't eat me either. The beautiful hand holding the teacup paused for a moment. She helplessly said, Good big sister, aren't you being a bit too overbearing? I've been suppressed for all these years, and my stomach has been rumbling with hunger. It wasn't easy for me to find a boy that tastes quite good. Little Meat's eyes turned even colder. If you don't agree, then you can try to eat me or be killed by me. There was a deathly silence. In the air, countless invisible sword breaths that were like swimming fishes gathered from all directions, continuously slashing at the beautiful hand that was holding the teacup. The moment they touched, they were smashed to pieces. But they weren't able to cause the least bit of damage to the hand. There really wasn't the slightest bit of damage. Not even a single hair was damaged. Okay, then I'll listen to Big Sister. I won't eat him. The beautiful hand put down the teacup and gently tapped the table. Big Sister, do you dare to make a bet with me? Bet on whether or not he dares to go in. Pa! With a snap of her fingers, the voice was full of smiles. Big Sister is so smart. No wonder you're living more comfortably than me. As long as he dares to go in, I will lend him my hand for a period of time. I won't make things difficult for him. But if he doesn't dare, Little Meat lightly said, if he doesn't dare, then I will cut off my own arm to make up for your body. Big Sister is straightforward. It's a deal. I see Frost Sword Sect. The sect's great protective array was opened. Han Xingyang announced to the outside that he would go into seclusion to search for a method to open up the sword prison. On the main peak, 14 sword sect elders were summoned. According to the guidance of the sword breaths, they stood in the corresponding positions. They didn't know what to do next, but no one dared to disobey the sect master's orders. The belly of the mountain was hollowed out, and a sword array was hidden within. Now, Han Xingyang, who had announced that he would go into seclusion, stood at the core of the sword array. Across from him was an old sword cultivator with white hair and an extremely withered face. He gave off the feeling that he was a piece of rotten wood, his life force-weak and weak, as if he could die at any moment. But within this withered body there was an incomparably terrifying sword breath that was as vast as a sea. It's here. This day has finally come. Good, ha ha ha, good. The old sword cultivator laughed into the skies, gasping for breath. His frail body couldn't even withstand the pull caused by the rise and fall of his chest, bringing with it waves of heart-wrenching pain. Han Xingyang said in a low voice, "Honorable Master, please take care of yourself." The old sword cultivator in front of him was the previous sect master of the icy Frost Sword Sect. He had the great reputation of Sword of Spring End. But over 1,000 years ago, it was announced that he had died in meditation. Who would have thought that he would still be alive today? The old sword cultivator took several deep breaths and waved his hand. It's fine. I will be going soon, so there is no need to worry about this. He looked straight at Han Jingyang, his dim yellow eyes bursting with brilliance. Remember, this is an opportunity that countless sword cultivators of the Icy Frost Sword sect have been waiting for many years. It has finally come to you. You must obtain the sealed item at all costs. As long as you refine it, you will definitely break through the door of immortals and become the world's first sword cultivator at the Emperor Realm. In the future, you will be able to call yourself the Tao ancestor of the sect and bring the Icy Frost Sword sect to greater heights, establishing it as the orthodox Sword Tao. Han Jingyang bowed. Don't worry, honorable master. I will definitely do my best and not let you and the other patriarchs down. However, the elders outside the Sword Peak are the pillars of the Sword sect. Petty kindness. The old sword cultivator's eyes were fierce as he stared at him. Remember, everything in this world has a price. This is a very fair trade. A group of sword sect elders, including me, are dead. You must obtain the sealed artifact. You must not lose it. Han Jingyang lowered his head. Yes, honorable master. In the depths of the sword prison, it was as dark as ink. The sword demon retreated slower and slower. Correspondingly, the range of the light swords above everyone's heads was shrinking. They were about to reach their limits. The deep darkness caused one's mind to be suppressed to the extreme, and breathing became incomparably difficult. Besides Qinyu, no one knew why they had come here. The members of the small fry squad didn't dare to disobey the great elder. In addition, Qinyu had chosen to go deeper, so it was impossible for them to leave. As for the people of the South Sea Sword sect, they had no choice. They could leave at any time, but as soon as they left the range of the light swords, they would be instantly torn to pieces. Sect Master Zhang Xiaoshan suddenly spoke up. Qinyu turned and looked at him. Have you reached your limit? On their foreheads, the runes that shined with light were now releasing high temperatures, causing the flesh and blood around them to wither away. Everyone was withstanding the torment. And this was only what they saw on the surface. In order to activate the runes, they had to consume their own strength. Although it was only a catalyst, and the consumption wasn't too great, maintaining it for a long period of time would still place a heavy burden on them. Zhang Xiaoshan glanced at the other members of the squad. He clenched his teeth and said, "This disciple can still persist a little longer." Qinyu thought for a moment. 1 hour. If we still haven't obtained anything, we will leave. Thank you, Sect Master. Zhang Xiaoshan revealed a look of gratitude. With these words, the extremely oppressive atmosphere in the squad was relieved. To enter deep into sword prison without knowing their goal or their destination. This was a great torment for everyone. Now there was finally hope. Time slowly passed. In the thick darkness, accompanied by the mournful and pained cries of the sword demons, the squad slowly moved forwards. Half an hour passed. Qinyu stopped. The darkness was still darkness, without any changes from before. At the very least, he couldn't sense anything different. Had they failed? Qinyu was a bit unwilling, but he knew that Zhang Xiaoshan and the others had indeed reached their limit. In fact, it was more accurate to say that 1 hour ago was already their limit. It was only because Qinyu had given them hope and stimulated their potential that they managed to persist for another hour. They couldn't continue forwards anymore, otherwise Zhang Xiaoshan and the others would die. And after losing the light swords, Qinyu didn't have full confidence that he could forcefully carve out a bloody path through the countless enemies. Taking a deep breath, Qinyu's eyes focused. Just as he was about to speak, the darkness in front of him suddenly surged. Like a giant fish swimming past, the darkness silently parted. The sword demons opened up a path, revealing a bright light not too far away. Qinyu furrowed his eyebrows. He looked forwards with rapt attention. The place where the light came from was a particularly lush patch of moss. The moss was densely packed together, barely able to illuminate a small area in this pitch-black darkness. There was a cave entrance there. In the depths of Sword Prison, behind the countless sword demons blocking the way, a cave entrance had suddenly appeared, the core of Sword Prison, sealed artifact. This thought instantly flashed through Qin Yu's mind. At this moment, Su Jing suddenly realized why Qin Yu had entered so deep into Sword Prison. This was the place he was looking for, the entrance to the core of Sword Prison. But now the Sword Cultivators of Heaven's Splitting Sword sect had clearly reached their limit. Even if it didn't seem far, they couldn't withstand it. Moreover, the darkness had parted on its own initiative, and the sword demons had opened up a path. No matter how he looked at it, it was like he was inviting them into a trap. Did Qin Yu dare to go over? It had to be known that in the past, Yan Ranshan had once sent out a formidable team of sword cultivators to slaughter their way into the core of Sword Prison. But in the end, not a single one of them had returned alive. Zhang Xiashan, disciple is here. Qin Yu turned around. All of you must immediately leave Sword Prison. This is an order from my sect. If the Great Elder wants to punish you, just report this. Whoosh! His figure flickered, and he rushed out from the range of the light swords. In the next moment, the darkness closed around him, swallowing him up from sight. Sect Master. Zhang Xiashan's eyes widened, his face filled with shock. Su Jing also had a shocked expression. She never imagined that Qin Yu would make such a decisive decision. Wasn't he afraid of death? Jin Hua and the other South Sea Sword Sect disciples fell silent. Zhang Xiashan took a deep breath. The disciples of Heaven, Splitting Sword Sect, obey orders. Withdraw from Sword Prison. The group of people slowly withdrew. The depths of Sword Prison fell into darkness like this, without the least bit of sound. Chapter 1720. As he walked forwards alone in the darkness, Qin Yu could clearly feel the ruthlessness and greed in the eyes of the sword demons around him. It seemed as if they would attack in the next moment and tear him into pieces with lightning speed. It would be a lie to say he wasn't afraid, but Qin Yu still took this step forwards. One reason was because of his trust in Midi, but another important reason was that as soon as he saw the hole, he had an intense thought he had to enter this hole no matter what. Suppressed roars constantly echoed out from the darkness. Qin Yu's complexion gradually paled, but this wasn't because of the sword demons surrounding him. In the thick moss, the pitch-black hole was like a gaping maw, waiting for its prey to deliver itself to it. Fear couldn't be suppressed. It surged out from the depths of his heart, crazily attacking Qin Yu's mind. He even began to hallucinate. Run. Hurry and run. Leave this place, the further the better. If I continue forward, all that awaits me is death. Beads of sweat dripped down Qin Yu's forehead. He let out a deep breath and stopped. He looked up at the hole in front of him, his eyes cloudy and uncertain. Thoughts wildly tumbled and collided in his mind. Heaven's Splitting Sword Sect. Not too far away from the stone steps, there was an outdoor table and chair. Bright laughter filled the air, filled with excitement. Big sister, it looks like I'm going to win. A beautiful hand grasped Midi's left hand. She stroked it a few times and then moved to the right. She bitterly sighed. They're all so good. So which one should I choose? It's really hard to decide. Midi maintained her composure. She grabbed her hand and said, It's a bit too early to worry about this. Does big sister want to go back on your word? Of course not. I just don't want to see you go back on your word. Midi's face was expressionless. Her eyes turned golden. You should know my temper. No one has ever been able to escape from my debt. The beautiful hand tightly grasped Midi's right hand. Big sister, don't worry. I have always kept my word. Time slowly passed. Midi suddenly looked up and pulled the beautiful hand in front of her. You lost. There was no one in front of her, only the hand in front of her. It had been cut off 3 inches above the wrist. revealing delicate white skin. The air vibrated. If you agree to a bet, you must accept your loss. The annoyed and helpless voice suddenly stopped. The beautiful hand that Meaty grabbed began to crack apart. From the flesh and blood, countless red tentacles drilled out, wrapping around Meaty and extending towards her arm. Humph! Meaty gave a cold snort. The stone table between the two of them was directly reduced to dust. A terrifying aura swept out, and within 1,000 feet of them, not a single place was left unscathed. Her golden eyes shone brightly, as if they were burning with golden flames. Endless, vast and majestic aura emanated from her body. The sword formation that the heaven-splitting sword sect had activated rumbled violently, as if it was about to explode from the inside out because of the sudden eruption of aura. The tentacles that came out of the severed hand retracted as if they had been electrocuted. The wounds on the surface healed and disappeared. The bloodstains that were left behind were quickly absorbed. In the blink of an eye, the hand had reverted to its previous beautiful appearance. There was none of the malevolence from before. Don't be angry, big sister. I was just being impulsive. Anger got to my head. Please be magnanimous and don't lower yourself to my level. I promise I won't do it again. Please give me a chance. I'll do whatever you want me to do. Little Meaty lowered its head, its golden eyes staring at the severed hand. Its white and delicate skin seemed to be being roasted at a high temperature. It quickly turned red, and then black spots appeared. It cried out in pain. It began to wail and whimper. If it were anyone else that heard this, they would have long since been unable to bear to harm it. But little Meaty's complexion didn't change. Her golden eyes turned even colder. Her flesh cracked, and the charring rapidly spread. The rot continued to deepen until white bone could be seen. Finally, there was a hint of panic in its cry of pain. Big sister, do you really want to be so ruthless? I know I was wrong. Please give me another chance. I won't dare to do it again. Humph! Little Meaty coldly snorted. She closed her eyes and then opened them again. The golden light in her eyes had vanished, and the violently rumbling heaven-splitting sword sect's great array slowly calmed down. Words are no proof. Let's sign a contract. Big sister, I really know I was wrong. There's no need to sign a contract. I will sign it now. Seeing the golden light in little Meaty's eyes reignite, the severed hand immediately changed its mind. A drop of golden blood gushed out from the severed hand. Its voice immediately became weak and powerless. Big sister, are you satisfied now? Little Meaty opened her mouth and swallowed the golden blood. Only then did she let go of the severed hand. You can go back. Big sister. Its voice was pitiful. Little Meaty had an indifferent expression. If you can keep your promise, I guarantee I will return your freedom within 100 years. Thank you, big sister. Space trembled, and the severed hand vanished from sight. Little Meaty picked up a teacup and quietly took a sip. Then she placed it down with a light smack. There was a miserable scream. The severed hand that had already left appeared in the air and then fell to the ground. The skin rapidly decayed, revealing dark red flesh and blood. Tiny tentacles emerged, desperately repairing the wound. Big sister, I just wanted to say a few more words to you. I don't have any other meaning. Little Meaty waved her hand. I don't want to hear it. The severed hand was sent flying away, crashing into space and disappearing without a trace. This time it really left. Little Meaty stuffily coughed. Blood flowed out from the corners of her mouth. This blood was mixed with specks of gold. She frowned and wiped her mouth clean. Then she lifted a hand and pointed at the void. A terrifying strength exploded in a narrow range, destroying everything. This finger shattered the remnants of the severed hand's aura and also thoroughly erased all signs of her weakness. Deep within Sword Prison, Chinyu hesitated for a moment and then continued forwards. This time his expression was firm. Even though his face was pale without the least bit of blood, his steps didn't slow down at all. He didn't stop until he reached the entrance of the cave. He took a deep breath and stepped in. Light suddenly erupted. Without warning, it ruthlessly pierced into Qin Yu's eyes. No matter how firm his mind was, he still couldn't help but cough as tears tumbled down his cheeks. Even so, Qin Yu still tried to keep his eyes wide open so that he wouldn't be caught off guard and suffer a sudden attack. Luckily, danger didn't arrive. His tear-blurred eyes gradually restored their vision. He lifted a hand and wiped them away. His red eyes were finally able to see his surroundings. Like this, a woman had appeared in front of him. It was more accurate to say that this was a woman who was impeccably beautiful and wore extremely revealing clothes. How cool and refreshing. In other words, besides the necessary spots, she was basically half exposed. As for those dots, they were blurry and indistinct. Qin Yu's heart raced. This had nothing to do with what he thought. It was purely instinct. And now he could finally see where the dazzling light came from. It was from this woman in front of him. She was too white, so white that there wasn't a single blemish on her body. Her entire being seemed to shine. Qin Yu, you finally arrived. I've been waiting for you here for a long time. Qin Yu took a step back and took a deep breath, his heart stirring. He cupped his hands together and bowed. How does Senior know my name? As soon as he entered, he was nearly blinded by the light. Then, as he saw this woman in front of him, she was basically completely exposed. His mind was struck again and again. Only now did Qin Yu manage to regain his composure. In the depths of Sword Prison, in the core layer, there was actually a woman. Moreover, this woman clearly knew him. This was strange to the point that it couldn't be any stranger. The woman rolled her eyes. She pouted and frowned. What are you calling me, Senior? Your words make this big sister sound old. I've known Little Meaty for many years, and we are good sisters, the ferromagnetic type. Before you came in, I made an agreement with her that I would definitely make your wishes come true without any difficulty at all. Speaking to here, the woman pointed outside. That hole outside is where I made a bet with Little Meaty, so I deliberately scared you. But Qin Yu, your guts aren't small at all. You actually made this big sister lose. As she spoke, she winked at him. But this big sister has always liked brave men. You aren't bad. Qin Yu's mind was a bit chaotic. He couldn't figure out whether or not this woman was speaking the truth. But if she could appear here, then her strength was beyond doubt. If she really planned something, she could have just directly attacked. There was no need to waste words. Moreover, this woman knew of Little Meaty's existence. But Little Meaty had been unclear from the start, only telling him to enter Sword Prison. Could it be that she came here to find her? My name is Fei. You can call me Big Sister Fei from now on. As she spoke, she looked at him again, her eyes filled with anticipation and shyness. Little Meaty told you to come find me. She must be too embarrassed to tell you, right? Qin Yu hesitated for a moment and then nodded. She didn't say it clearly. Fei's face flushed red. She coquettishly said, This Little Meaty, do you want me to say it myself? That's just too embarrassing. Qin Yu. He suddenly felt that something wasn't quite right. He coughed lightly and said, How about I go out and ask her first? Fei waved her hand. No need. Isn't it just something between a man and a woman? This big sister can accept this. As she spoke, she pointed a finger at herself. You see, I am the sealed artifact of Sword Prison. If you want to leave this place, you have to come over and do it with this big sister. Don't ask me how to do it. Otherwise, this big sister will really get angry. Qin Yu was instantly stunned. To be stared at like this by such a beautiful and enchanting woman with such an expression. If he said he wasn't tempted at all, then he would be bragging. Could this really be the case? Is that why Little Meaty only said half of the story? If I want to obtain the sealed artifact, I have to do it. I was forced by the situation. I had no other choice, right? Cough, cough, cough. He coughed and choked on his saliva. Qin Yu rubbed his face and bitterly smiled. Big sister Fei Fei, don't mess around. That's impossible. Fei Fei blinked her eyes. Why is it impossible? Big sister has been locked up for so many years. If you can be released after suffering a little, that's a good thing. I don't oppose it, but… She glanced down. You can't do it? Don't be afraid. Big sister can help you. Qin Yu nearly had a nosebleed. He took several steps back and shook his head. No, but I don't believe that little meaty would do that. He took a deep breath. Big sister Fei Fei, don't joke around. Chapter 1721. Fei Fei pouted. You're pretty smart, kid. Looks like Little Meat was very interested in you before. She looked up and down and suddenly said, That's right, I was indeed joking just now, but Big Sister said that I lost the bet, so I'm in a bad mood. Meaty Meaty is watching you so closely. If I steal a bite, she'll suffer a loss. That's only fair. How about it, little Qin Yu? Do you really not want to do that with this Big Sister? This place is my territory. Little Meaty won't be able to see it at all. Furthermore, I guarantee that only the two of us will know about this. I won't tell anyone else. Again, Qin Yu felt that if he continued to be teased by this woman, sooner or later he would bleed from his head. Gritting his teeth, he turned around. Sister Fei Fei, if you're not leaving, then I'll leave first. Stop! Fei Fei's eyes widened, her face filled with indignation. You little brat, when did you go blind? He doesn't want a beauty like me even if she takes the initiative to come to him. She gritted her teeth. Just you wait. This isn't over yet. I don't believe that I can't take down a junior like you. Qin Yu felt a headache coming on. Sister Fei Fei, what are you trying to do? Brat, hurry up and get over here. Carry me away from here. Stop glaring at me. I'm in a terrible mood right now. Even if you change your mind, I'm not interested. Fei Fei said with a sour expression. I'm sealed here and can't move by myself. If you don't want to return empty-handed, then come here immediately. Qin Yu hesitated. He clenched his teeth and walked over. Then, I'll have to offend you. He closed his eyes and reached out to hug her. She was lighter and softer than he imagined, and she also smelled very nice. Women were made of water. Today, Qin Yu finally had a more intuitive feeling. She pressed herself against his body and felt like she was going to melt into his body in the next moment. Hiss! I can't think about it anymore. Qin Yu quickly restrained his thoughts. He lowered his head and stood there like a block of wood. Then he hugged her and walked out. Sniff. Sniff again. He sniffed seriously. He took a deep breath. Fei Fei couldn't help but lift a hand and wipe the corners of her mouth. She looked at Qin Yu, her eyes sparkling. She regretted it. He shouldn't have agreed to Little Meat's request a long time ago. He shouldn't have taken the initiative to run out and try to eat her. As long as she stayed here and waited for Qin Yu to come knocking on her door, she could open her mouth and eat her fill. At that time, even if the meat went berserk, there was a high chance that she would be able to escape and not end up in such a miserable state. Torment, it was truly torment. At this moment, Fei Fei was like a person who had been starving for many years and was holding a delicious meat bun in her arms. But she could not eat it at all. The taste was unimaginable. She could only keep wiping away her saliva, but the speed of wiping was far slower than the speed of secretion. Women were indeed made of water. Qin Yu looked down and saw that his chest was already wet. He thought to himself, you woman, just how hungry are you? At least bear with it. What do you mean by getting your saliva all over me? Didn't you say you were not interested in sex? This was clearly a blatant seduction. Hang in there, don't take the bait. Otherwise, he might feel good in the underworld today, but when he returned, he would be buried in the crematorium. Little Meat was not someone to be trifled with. In the shallow lair of Sword Prison, almost all the sword cultivators who were still alive had gathered here and joined hands to form a sword formation to resist the crazy attacks from the sword demon. Many people had already died. It was not an exaggeration to say that the ground was littered with corpses. The air was filled with the thick smell of blood. Reality proved that Qin Yu's judgment was correct. This time, the shallow layer of the sword prison was indeed no longer safe. There were many high-grade sword demons, but the truly terrifying ones were two peerless sword demons. Furthermore, it was two peerless grade sword demons, and they had actually chased him all the way here. If it were not for the sword cultivators who were acting as the path protectors, who were strong enough to join hands to block them, the sword cultivators here would have died long ago. The Cliff Mountain Sword Sects group was trapped here. Now there were only 2 disciples left alive. Another 5 people had fallen in the sword prison. Elder Kong Weijin's face was as white as paper. His aura was extremely weak. There was an extremely terrifying wound on his chest. It was as if his entire upper body was directly cut into 2. With such a serious injury, it was a miracle that he was still alive. Qiu Shan, you must get out of here alive. The future of the Cliff Mountain Sword Sect depends on you. As he spoke, he spat out blood. He grabbed his disciple's arm so hard that his veins popped. Elder, I know. Don't talk anymore. Lie down and rest. You will definitely get better. Qiu Shan's eyes were red, his body trembling. If it was not to save him, with the elder's cultivation, he would not have suffered such a serious injury. It's him, it's all because of him. Kong Weijin's hand suddenly loosened, and he let out his last breath. Qiu Shan's tears fell like rain. Just at this moment, there was a muffled dong sound, and a patch of light sprinkled down from above, illuminating everyone inside. The surviving sword cultivators widened their eyes as they looked up. After a short moment of shock, their faces were filled with joy. The exit of the sword prison had opened. As the exit of the sword prison opened, the sword demons all screamed in pain. Their bodies exploded with a bang. Loud explosions rang out. In the blink of an eye, the surrounding darkness retreated. All the sword demons had disappeared. We survived. Weak survived. Sitting on his butt, Qiu Shan looked around in a daze. Suddenly, he hugged his head and cried loudly. His cries stirred up the surrounding sword cultivators. Very quickly, there were cries everywhere. They had indeed survived, but even more sword cultivators had been left here forever. Amongst them, there might have been their fellow sect members, friends, relatives, lovers. The sword prison had opened just like that. The surviving sword cultivators were rescued at the fastest speed. Some hugged each other and cried, but most of them were in pain and sorrow. The sword cultivators outside had already learned of the situation inside the sword prison. According to their descriptions, those who had not retreated to the surface of the sword prison were most likely dead. This made many people who had originally harbored a glimmer of hope unable to accept it. Subsequently, they felt a deep anger. Why? All the sword sects had suffered heavy casualties, but there were people who were unscathed. This was definitely not luck. Where are the people of the heaven-splitting sword sect? The first low roar came from an unknown person. Very quickly, this anger infected everyone. Their faces were extremely gloomy and their eyes were ice cold. The sword prison is completely out of control. The sword demons have attacked all the sword cultivators in a frenzy. No one can stay out of it. There must be more to this matter. The heaven-splitting sword sect must give everyone a convincing explanation. We must get to the bottom of this. The enraged sword cultivators of the various sects had not yet directed their anger at the South Sea sword sect. The title of one of the 10 sword sects and the position of swordmaster was still a powerful deterrent. But Wei Hung was still deeply worried. When anger burned to a certain degree and infected enough people, it would produce a group effect that would destroy one's rationality and cause the crowd to become arrogant and fearless. At that time, the South Sea Sword Sect would inevitably be implicated, so if he wanted to separate from the heaven-splitting sword sect, now was the last chance. Taking a deep breath, Wei Hung lifted a hand and took out a jade slip. He crushed it. The message in the jade slip was a compromise he had made. The recipient was the Cold Frost sword sex Han Zhenyang. Who? Wei Hung let out a long breath. A trace of shame appeared in the depths of his eyes, but it was immediately suppressed. He had no other choice in this matter. At this time there was a sudden shout. "They're out! The people of the heavens splitting sword sect. There's also the South Sea sword sect. They really are together." Wei Hung looked up. He saw Su Jing leading her disciples out of the sword prison's exit. Shua! His figure flickered, and he appeared in front of everyone. Su Jing's eyes revealed a trace of excitement. He cupped his hands together and bowed. "Greetings, sect master." Jin Hua and the other disciples also bowed. Wei Hung nodded. He patted his shoulder. "It's good that you're back." He took a deep breath and flicked his sleeves. This trip to sword prison was far too thrilling. "All of you must be tired. Return to the sect and rest first. We can discuss other matters later." An invisible strength sent Jin Hua and the other disciples back to where the South Sea sword sect's sword cultivators were. Su Jing frowned, a questioning look in her eyes. The two apprentice brothers had grown up together, and their minds were truly connected. Wei Heng's mouth didn't move, but his voice sounded out in their minds. The heaven-splitting sword sect has become the target of public criticism. We must separate from it. Su Jing's frown deepened. "Senior apprentice brother, the reason that I and several disciples were able to return alive is all thanks to sect Master Qin's assistance. Junior apprentice brother, this matter involves the life or death of the South Sea sword sect. Even if it is, as you say, I have no other choice." Wei Heng glanced across and smiled. "Sect Master Qin is not here? I have already heard Elder Su Jing's explanation. This time, it is all thanks to the heaven-splitting sword sect that they are safe. After handling the aftermath, I will personally pay a visit to the heaven-splitting sword sect and offer them generous gifts to express my gratitude." Su Jing opened his mouth, but no words came out. His senior brother had drawn a line between them. Although it seemed like he was expressing his gratitude, it was already very obvious. He found this somewhat difficult to accept. He felt uneasy and ashamed, but his senior brother had used the survival of the sect to pressure him. Su Jing could only remain silent. Perhaps when his master had handed the South Sea sword sect to his senior brother, it was because he knew that his senior brother was more suitable to be the sect master than him. Zhang Xiaoshan sensed the strange atmosphere. The surrounding sword cultivators were looking at them with cold gazes, so cold that it penetrated into their bones. Something had happened. Taking a deep breath, Zhang Xiaoshan bowed with his remaining arm. "Sect Master Wei, my sect master has gone deep into sword prison and has yet to return. Our disciples have suffered severe losses, so I ask that you find a place for us to temporarily rest." Wei Heng's eyes flashed. He smiled. "Your esteemed sect's protector, who is currently outside sword prison. He should be arriving soon, so there is no need for the South Sea sword sect to overstep their boundaries. I still need to appease my disciples, so all of you can wait here." He turned and left. Junior apprentice brother. Su Jing stiffened. He glanced at Zhang Xiaoshan and the others, his eyes darkening. He lowered his head and left. Whoosh! With the sound of breaking air, Hu Jiming howled over. He landed in front of those from the heaven-splitting sword sect, his eyes sweeping over the 12 unharmed people. His heart was filled with emotion. They were alive, they were all alive. The sect master and great elder were truly gods. He, old Hu, could prostrate himself in admiration. Where is the sect master? Zhang Xiaoshan's lips moved. He hasn't come out yet. There were too many people here, so he couldn't say too much. Hu Jiming's complexion changed. This is troublesome. Be careful, those people outside don't find us pleasing to the eye. A wandering disciple glared at him. Why? Hu Jiming sneered. because not a single person from our heaven-splitting sword sect has died. Chapter 17:22. Chiu Shan was in a daze. Images of Elder Kong Wei Jin and his fellow sect members before they died flashed through his mind. Dead, they were all dead. Cliff Mountain Sword Sect had 13 people, and now only he and his junior sister were left. Sect Master Jiang Tsunzhou's face was filled with grief. The dead cannot be revived. You only need to remember that it was Elder Kong who used his life to protect you too. He glanced at the heaven-splitting sword sect people not far away. Let's go! The Cliff Mountain Sword Sect was just one of the small sword sects in Swallow Ran Mountain. Today, Kong Wei Jin and his disciples had died, nearly exhausting the sect's foundation. It was already difficult for them to survive. They did not have the energy or ability to do anything else. In the world of sword cultivators, it was not all about taking revenge. Lowering one's head and enduring was also necessary. Chiu Shan was muddle-headed. He followed the sect master and his junior brothers out. Suddenly, he stumbled and fell heavily to the ground. Senior brother Chiu. The junior sister, who had left sword prison with him, quickly went to grab him. But she forgot that she was also on the verge of collapse. She was dragged along, and the two rolled together. Pooh! Chiu Shan spat out a mouthful of blood, staining his junior sister's chest. She cried out, "Sect master, look at senior brother Chiu Shan, he's spitting out blood!" Jiang Tsunzhou's figure flashed, grabbing Chiu Shan's shoulder. Don't let your thoughts run wild. Focus your mind and stabilize your injuries. Chiu Shan nodded to his junior sister, wiping his mouth. Sect master, disciple is fine. After spitting out blood, I feel like I'm alive. He struggled to get up, his eyes indicating for his junior sister to let go. He knelt on the ground. Sect master. Elder Kong risked his life to save disciple, but disciple has let you down. Let Cliff Mountain Sword Sect down. From now on, disciple will leave Cliff Mountain Sword Sect and establish my own sect. Everything I do has nothing to do with Cliff Mountain Sword Sect. Pung pung pung. Chiu Shan kowtowed 3 times. Jiang Tsunzhou snapped. Chiu Shan, what are you doing? Quickly take back your words. Otherwise I will not let you off easily. Chiu Shan took a deep breath, an abnormal flush appearing on his face. He stood up from the ground. Sect Master Jiang, wait for me to finish my words. If you want to kill me, Chiu Shan will do as you please. Turning around, he looked at the people from the sky, sword sect, and strode forward. Hearing the commotion and feeling it, Chiu Shan's eyes revealed something. The sword cultivators in front of him all retreated, opening up a path for him. Standing still, Chiu Shan was expressionless, his eyes cold. Today, I would like to ask everyone from Heaven's Splitting Sword Sect, why are you all safe and sound when the sword prison went out of control and the calamity descended? This question is not only on behalf of me, but also on behalf of countless sword cultivators from various sects who died in the sword prison. Please give me an answer. Hu Jiming frowned. His face was expressionless, and no one noticed that his hand, hidden within his sleeve, suddenly trembled. However, at a time like this, they absolutely could not show the slightest sign of weakness. Otherwise, all of them would be torn to pieces in the blink of an eye. When an angry group exploded, they did not consider the gains and losses, right and wrong, and the consequences. They only believed in what they saw. In Swallow Run Mountain, the great sword cultivators had suffered heavy casualties, and only the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect was unscathed. This wasn't their fault, but at this time it was their greatest mistake. Fellow Taoist, your words are quite novel. Could it be that you will only be satisfied if my Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect is completely wiped out? After speaking, Hu Jiming didn't give him a chance to speak. He swept his eyes around. Everyone, right now, your eyes don't look at us like fellow sword cultivators, but like you are looking at a sword demon that has leapt out from the ground. What Is it because my heaven-splitting sword sex people are still alive, so you feel indignant and want to kill us to accompany your fallen comrades in death? In the current situation, they could not take a single step back. If they did, they would die. If they took a tough stance and struck first, perhaps they might be able to find a way to survive. Sect Master, where are you? Hurry up and come back, otherwise we really are finished. Sword prison. What sort of feeling was it to hold a beautiful woman who was drooling over you? For Chinyu to personally explain it, this was indeed a torturous matter. In particular, this woman was constantly throwing flirtatious glances at you. Her body was as soft as water, and from time to time she would twist twice. Hiss! This was simply unbearable. Chin, you didn't know how he managed to endure this. There was a sudden cold snort in his ears. The woman in his arms seemed to touch a red-hot iron as she leapt up like a carp. It was Meaty. Chin Yu glanced at the woman, who was several meters away from him, and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. He subconsciously thought, what this woman said just now wasn't wrong. Meaty really couldn't see. Otherwise, she wouldn't have endured until now. To make a sound. Why did she suddenly feel a bit of regret? The kind that couldn't be suppressed at all. Fei Fei seemed to sense something. She glanced at Chinyu, her eyes full of smiles and tiny little hooks. Chinyu hurriedly lowered his head and strangled the ripples in his heart. He had to endure it. How good was it to be alive? Why did he have to seek death? Not to mention Meaty. Just this woman in front of him was a good sister to Meaty. She wasn't someone that just anyone could bite. If he provoked her, he feared he wouldn't be able to survive. TCH, you only have this little bit of courage. I was just praising you for being brave, but this big sister was wrong. Fei Fei curled her lips, her face full of disgust. Chinyu coughed. Big sister Fei Fei is right. I have always been a timid person. It's time to get down to business. Meaty's cold voice echoed out. Fei Fei looked up, her eyes seeming to pierce through all obstacles. I know. What good sister? All you know is how to make others work. Well, your little baby, I've returned you in one piece. Take care of yourself. If anything happens, don't blame me. After she finished speaking, she winked at Chinyu and turned to leave. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Her figure vanished from sight. Chinyu rubbed his nose, trying to alleviate his embarrassment. Cough. Meaty, this Fei Fei, what is her background? Meaty didn't answer, and instead asked, I saw that you seemed a bit regretful just now. Chinyu righteously said, No, not at all. Don't you understand what sort of person I am? I won't fall for a mere sugar-coated bullet. Meaty coldly sneered. It's best if you don't. If you really do, believe me, no one can save you. In an instant, Chinyu's forehead was covered with sweat. He rubbed his face and said, Now, can you tell me clearly just what is going on? It's easy to explain just a few words, but you had best hurry up and leave. People are about to die outside. Hu Jiming's tough attitude didn't last for too long. Qiu Shan's eyes began to turn bloodshot, and he was about to go crazy. And at this time, if someone attacked first, it would be like a spark falling into a pile of dry wood. It would instantly ignite a prairie fire that would burn everyone from the heaven-splitting sword sect to ashes. Everyone. Our Swallow Mountain has always been a place of reason. There is no evidence against us. Could it be that because no one from our heaven-splitting sword sect has died that we have to suffer the wrath of others? There is no such reasoning in this world. Once this matter spreads out, the lives and deaths of those from my heaven-splitting sword sect are minor, but the reputation of Swallow Mountain as a holy land of swordsmanship will suffer irreparable damage. There was an effect. Many approaching sword cultivators revealed hesitant expressions. Right now, they were only suspecting. No one could produce any evidence. As for us sword cultivators, we are the most reasonable. Hu Jiming's spirit was lifted. What's more, everyone knows that all of us, including me, have just entered the heaven-splitting sword sect recently. Even if there are some sect secrets, do you think we have the qualifications to participate? That is clearly impossible. So, regarding what happened in Sword Prison, I ask everyone to remain calm. Once my sect Master Cheen returns from Sword Prison, he will naturally give everyone an explanation. Moreover, I have already sent word that my heaven-splitting sword sect's great elder will soon arrive. In truth, Hu Jiming didn't have any confidence in these last words. He had only seen the great elder once on the day he entered the heaven-splitting sword sect. Afterwards, he hadn't seen her again. In fact, when Sect Master Chinyu brought people into Sword Prison, she didn't even show herself. Disregarding everything else, for a wandering cultivator to be able to do so well in Swallow Mountain, lucky chances were definitely the primary reason. But she also had her own outstanding qualities. Hu Jiming had an extremely accurate eye for people. Although he had only seen her once, he could clearly feel the great elder's distant indifference, as if they were as far apart as the heavens and earth. Just like that, how could the great elder care about them? Sword cultivators who had just entered the sect? Perhaps she wouldn't even bat an eyelid before they died. The only one he could rely on was the sect master. As for how the sect master would deal with the situation after he came out, Hu Jiming wasn't worried. Even this small team of weaklings could slaughter their way in and out of Sword Prison without a single scratch. Just how great was their ability? It wouldn't be a problem to resolve the current situation. But the key was that they had to last until the sect master came out. The current situation was that everyone in the heaven-splitting sword sect was sitting on a barrel of gunpowder. Who knew when they would explode? His eyes turned. Hu Jiming's face lit up with joy. He loudly said, "Sect Master Gu." When my sect master came out of seclusion, he personally went to the sword forging sect to visit. He said that he hit it off with Sect Master Gu and that they were already friends. Sect Master Gu is of noble character and unquestionable integrity. Everyone knows that he values friendship above all else. Now that my heaven-splitting sword sect is in a difficult situation, I ask Sect Master Gu to speak up for us. Seeing the joy on Hu Jiming's face, Mei Xinglin's heart skipped a beat. He groaned inwardly, thinking that Hu Jiming should be killed for knowing the sect master's character like the back of his hand. The current heaven-splitting sword sect was just like a deep pit. Anyone who touched it would be unlucky. He turned around and signaled to the sect master with his eyes. Normally it was fine, but this pit couldn't be jumped into. Sect Master Gu frowned. He pondered for a moment, a difficult expression on his face. Hu Jiming bowed. I've often heard that Sect Master Gu's ideals are as great as the clouds, and that you are a hero of my Yen Ran Mountain, who values friendship above all else. AI, forget it. I can understand that Sect Master Gu is in a difficult situation. If we don't die today, we will definitely explain things to Sect Master Gu after we see him. We will not ruin the friendship between you and Sect Master. Left hand flattering and right hand provoking, it was over. Mei Xinglin revealed a sorrowful expression. Indeed, in the next moment, there was a flash of white, and the Sect Master was gone. Sect Master Gu rose into the air, his posture as elegant as an immortal's. His brows were slightly furrowed, revealing a faint dignity. The matter of the heaven-splitting sword sect has yet to come to a conclusion. Even if you are suspicious and angry, bear with it for now. It won't be too late to pursue the matter after it is investigated. His hands were behind his back, his eyes calm and determined. Men, bring the people of the heaven-splitting sword sect to the sword crafting sect. I guarantee that before the truth is revealed, none of them will be allowed to leave. If anything unexpected happens, the sword crafting sect will bear the consequences. His words were reasonable and his bearing extraordinary. Coupled with the guarantee of the sword crafting sect, the expressions of the various sword cultivators surrounding the heaven-splitting sword sect eased. Humph! Who doesn't know that the sword crafting sect is the only sword sect in Yen Ran Mountain that doesn't need to participate in the examination? Of course it's easy for you to say that. Yes, capture the people of the heaven-splitting sword sect. We can't let them leave. Seek justice for our dead sect members. These voices sounded out in a mess, mixed in with the crowd of sword cultivators. It was difficult to distinguish them for a moment. However, this was not a problem for Sect Master Gu. His reputation as the strongest in the world of equipment in Yen Ran Mountain was not just for show. A jade hairpin on his head glowed faintly. In the next moment, Sect Master Gu's eyes were like lightning. He raised his hand and grabbed at the air. 7 flustered sword cultivators were directly pulled out. You dare to question my sect? How dare you? Report it to the sect. Let me see where your confidence comes from. The people who were pulled out were extremely flustered and could not hide their guilt. You don't dare to report it? Or do you not belong to a sect at all? What are the intentions of a group of itinerant cultivators mixed in with the crowd? Sect Master Gu was expressionless as he calmly swept his gaze across the surroundings. I hope that all of you can calm down. Do not be used by those with ulterior motives and lead to irreversible consequences. Mei Shenlin, take the people and leave. Seeing that the sect master had stabilized the situation, Mei Shenlin could only lead the sword crafting sect disciples over helplessly. Hu Jiming's face was full of admiration. Sect Master Gu's elegant bearing far surpasses the rumors. You are truly worthy of being the role model of sword cultivators in my heart. Before he finished speaking, Mei Shenlin pulled him back. Mei Shenlin grinned and gnashed his teeth. Is this enough? Hu Jiming decisively shut his mouth. In everything, going too far was as bad as not going far enough. Because of the sword crafting sect's intervention and the discovery of some itinerant cultivators with ulterior motives, the situation was temporarily under control. Hu Jiming, Zhang Sheshan, and the other heaven-splitting sword sect sword cultivators were brought to where the sword crafting sect was. But they were still surrounded by sword cultivators. It was impossible for them to leave. And when Hu Jiming said that he would send a message to the Great Elder and that he would soon arrive, he had been slapped in the face. 2 hours passed. With the speed of a high-grade sword cultivator, they should have arrived long ago. But there wasn't a single shadow to be seen. And, most importantly, even now, the people outside Sword Prison still hadn't seen Qinyu emerge. A thought uncontrollably appeared in the hearts of many sword cultivators. The heaven-splitting sword sect master and great elder couldn't have quietly fled after achieving their goal, right? They had left Hu Jiming and the others as sacrificial pawns to stall for time. The crowd began to stir restlessly once more. Mei Shenlin wiped a cold sweat from his forehead. Sect Master, can we really not care about this matter? You've already done everything you could. No one can say anything about it. Sect Master Gu frowned. He glanced at Sword Prison. Wait a little longer. Chapter 17:23. Goodbye. You've bought enough time for the heaven-splitting sword sect. You should leave. The sword master of East Mountain stepped on the void and approached. A commotion broke out among the swordsmen below. After the opening of the sword jail, it was confirmed that all 13 members of the East Mountain sword sect, including their Tao protector, had perished within. Sect Master Gu frowned and looked up at the sky. Sword Master of East Mountain, as a member of the Sword Master Guild, are you going to detain me without any evidence? The East Mountain Sword Master's expression was indifferent. His gaze was condescending. Goodbye. If you leave now, none of this has anything to do with you. Are you sure that the sword forging sect will bear all the consequences? His tone was calm, but it was as heavy as a mountain. Sect leader Gu remained unmoved. Beside him, Elder Mei Xinglin's legs had already turned to jelly. The appearance of the Eastern Mountain Sword Master did not just represent the Eastern Mountain Sword Sect. It was obvious that this was the will of the Sword Master Guild. Once these words were spoken, it would be a done deal. The sword crafting sect would really have to vouch for the Heavenly Splitting Sword Sect. Sect leader, don't be impulsive. The East Mountain Sword Master is here. Fellow Taoists of the Heaven-Splitting Swordsmanship Sect are only cooperating with the investigation. There won't be any danger. If you're worried, you can pay more attention to the process. You value relationships and righteousness, and our sword crafting sect shares your honor. However, as the sect master, you cannot only care about yourself. You have to think about the thousands of disciples and people in the sect. Glancing at it, Sect Master Gu frowned slightly. Mei Xinglin took a deep breath and gritted his teeth. As an elder of the sword forging sect, I absolutely cannot agree to this. If Sect Master insists on being a guarantor for the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect, don't blame me for calling the elders to impeach you. Please temporarily hand over your authority as Sect Master. A sword cultivator in the crowd was full of admiration. He said loudly, Sect Master Gu is so righteous. You've already earned our respect by doing so much for the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. You don't need to persist. That's right, Sect Master Gu. Now that sword prison has gone out of control, the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect is indeed a suspect. Right now, the whereabouts of the Sect Master Qinyu and the Great Elder are unknown. It is unwise for you to continue meddling in this matter. Sect Master Gu, please step back. We only want an answer and an explanation. We do not wish to have a conflict with the sword crafting sect because of this matter. The East Mountain Sword Master's eyes were cold. Gu Bai, don't make a mistake. Sect Master Gu let out a long sigh, a trace of sadness on his face. He cupped his hands together. Everyone, this is all I can do. His tone was bleak. Hu Jiming took a deep breath. Sect Master Gu, you've done your best. My Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect doesn't know what's good for us. If you leave now, my sect will still owe you a favor. He waved his hand. Disciples of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect, follow me to thank Sect Master Gu and the Sword Forging Sect for helping us today. As he spoke, he was the first to pay his respects. Zhang Xiaoshan and the rest revealed sorrowful expressions and followed behind him. Greetings, Sect Master Gu. You didn't lower yourself to the same level as me. You clearly knew that I was trying to provoke you, but you still acted to protect us. Second, Sect Leader Gu. Her righteousness is as high as the clouds in the sky. She has only met Sect Leader Qin twice, but she is willing to take on this great responsibility. Thank you, Sect Leader Gu, for standing up for justice for our Heaven-Splitting Swordsmanship Sect. I am willing to continue paying attention to the investigation of the truth behind the loss of control of the sword prison. Fourth, we pay our respects to Sect Master Gu. You are still persevering even at this moment. Such a righteous and noble action makes me and the others admire you from the bottom of our hearts. Fifth, Mei Xinglin had a strange expression on his face. He glanced at Hu Jiming, whose face was full of gratitude and whose every word came from the bottom of his heart. He secretly admired him. This glib tongue, this shamelessness, they were all quite outstanding. But he didn't forget what serious matters were. He reached out and grabbed his sect master without batting an eyelid. He gave him a resolute look. This was a matter of life and death. He couldn't just jump into it carelessly just because of a few words from someone else. The East Mountain Sword Master bellowed. Shut up. Hu Jiming shut his mouth decisively. Sect Master Gu frowned and looked over with an unfriendly gaze. The East Mountain Sword Master's mouth couldn't help but twitch. But everyone was well aware of Gu Bai's character. They didn't want to be entangled with him on such matters. It wasn't because they were afraid, but because it wasn't worth it. Mei Xinglin held on tightly to his sect master with all his might. He was afraid that the sect master would draw his sword in anger. If that happened, there would be no way to clean up the mess. Hu Jiming deserved to die. The people of the heaven-splitting sword sect can be handed over to the East Mountain Sword Master, but my sect will continue to pay attention to the aftermath. As for the matter of sword prison going out of control, I hope that the Sword Master can clearly investigate this matter and bring out accurate and detailed evidence. Don't convict anyone based on nothing. Sect Master Gu's eyes fell on Hu Jiming. Protector Hu, take care of yourself. What a good disciple. If he could escape this calamity, he would bring him into the sword-forging sect and have him by his side. This would be perfect. Hu Jiming's lips moved, but before he could speak, he was interrupted by a cold snort. The East Mountain Sword Master's face darkened. Take them away! At this time, the cry of a sword rose up. Its speed was astonishing. At first it was far away, but in the blink of an eye it approached. What followed was an invisible pressure that enveloped everyone's hearts. How strong! The sword cultivators present subconsciously looked up. Their eyes swept in all directions, but they couldn't find this approaching sword path powerhouse. No, the source of this sword cry was from sword prison. Everyone turned their heads. A sword shadow howled out, flying into the skies. Shwa! The sword aura faded away, revealing a figure within. Hu Jiming's eyes widened, nearly crying tears of joy. Sect Master! Zhang Sheshan and the other heaven-splitting sword sect disciples also had excited expressions. Qin Yu glanced at them and nodded. I've returned. He looked up and looked straight at the East Mountain Sword Master. Who are you? This question nearly caused everyone to sprain their waists. They were immediately freed from the tense atmosphere just now, and their complexions became strange. Hu Jiming coughed. Sect Master, this is the East Mountain Sword Master. He represents the East Mountain Sword Sect, and is one of the members of the Sword Master Union. Qin Yu frowned. The Sword Master Union can detain other sword sect disciples at will? I didn't know that Swallow Mountain had such a rule. With just a few words, swords were drawn. The sword cultivators that had just let out a breath of relief suddenly felt their heartbeats speed up. They could clearly see the situation before them. The heaven-splitting sword sect Master Qin Yu had suddenly returned from sword prison and was in direct conflict with the East Mountain Sword Master, not yielding an inch. And within Swallow Mountain, the East Mountain Sword Master's temper was famed for being fierce. In this situation, the East Mountain Sword Sect had suffered heavy casualties, and everyone was watching. A conflict could be expected. Regardless of the truth behind sword prison's loss of control or whether or not it was related to the heaven-splitting sword sect, at this moment, all the sword cultivators hoped that the East Mountain Sword Master would take action and teach the heaven-splitting sword sect a lesson. This had nothing to do with their standpoint. It was only related to the sudden rise of the heaven-splitting sword sect and the fact that they had broken the situation within Swallow Mountain. It was also related to the fact that the various sword sects had suffered heavy casualties when sword prison was opened. After all, if it weren't for the heaven-splitting sword sect suddenly returning to Swallow Mountain to disrupt the situation, there would have been no sword sect entrance examination and no one would have died. This was unreasonable. But sometimes the human heart was like this. Not everyone was willing to reason with others in every situation. The East Mountain Sword Master's eyes were ice cold. Sect Master Qin Yu, the Sword Master Union will not detain other sword sect disciples at will. This is my answer to you. Then I will tell you in person that the Sword Master Union has already issued an order to thoroughly investigate the matter of sword prisons loss of control. According to the evidence we have, we need you to go to the Sword Master Union and cooperate with the investigation. Qin Yu lightly said, Evidence? The East Mountain Sword Master can take it out. After I take a look at it, I will decide whether or not to cooperate. Hiss! The sword cultivators sucked in a breath of cold air. They thought that this sect master of the heaven-splitting sword sect was truly fierce to the extreme. The Sword Master Union represented the highest authority over the entirety of Swallow Mountain. To provoke them was the same as provoking them. This was the greatest rule of Swallow Mountain, and in the history of Swallow Mountain, such a matter had never occurred before. Even the Icy Frost Sword Sect, known as the strongest of the 10 sword sects, didn't dare to do such a thing. But without a doubt, this was the situation they wanted to see the most. The fierce and arrogant heaven-splitting sword sect would continue on this road of no return. They would wait to see just how distressed they would be in the end. The East Mountain Sword Master narrowed his eyes. An invisible sword aura surged around him. Heaven-splitting sword sect Master Chinyu, as a member of the Sword Master Union, I formally warn you that any actions that provoke the Sword Master Union will be regarded as rebellion. Rebellion? You think you are worthy of convicting me? Chinyu looked up at the skies. He felt that his current performance wasn't perfect enough. In terms of the realm of posturing, he was still far from being able to do so. There were far too many areas he needed to learn. For instance, his tone should be a bit lighter and his eyes should be a bit lower. As he looked up at the skies, he also looked at the distant mountains, giving off an even more unfathomable feeling. If he moved a bit sideways and showed off his silhouette to everyone, the effect would be even better. Sect Master Gu was a true master of this path. As for why he had to pretend, Little Meaty had said that the more arrogant he was, the more noise he would make and the more benefits he would obtain. Chinyu had repeatedly confirmed that she wasn't speaking nonsense. So what was there to hesitate about? Who didn't know how to pretend? So he had to pretend. The East Mountain Sword Master's complexion paled. Very good. Bang. A terrifying sword aura broke out from his body, instantly shooting into the skies and tearing apart the clouds above. Today, allow me to experience Sect Master Qin's strength. Hu Jiming was dumbfounded. No matter what, he never imagined that after the Sect Master returned, he would be able to quickly and easily cause matters to develop to this step. To use his own strength to fight against the entire Sword Master Guild. Stop messing around. Such a thing was simply impossible. This was absolutely seeking death. At this moment, what angered him the most was that Zhang Sheshan and the others beside him had faces full of excitement, as if they were cheering loudly at any moment. Had these brats been kicked in the head by a donkey? A calamity was about to befall them. Yet they still didn't know. It was over. They were completely finished this time. Originally, because of what happened in Sword Prison, the various great sword sects didn't like them very much. Now that they had an excellent excuse, wouldn't they grab onto it? Provoking the Sword Master Guild. Gubai's expression was calm. His eyes fell on Chinyu, his heart filled with emotion. He thought to himself that there was always a higher mountain. These words weren't deceiving him. Looking back on my life, although I've always been accompanied by a cool breeze, I've never reached such a level. Sect Master Qin was truly extraordinary. As for the result of this matter, Gubai felt that it was too early to draw a conclusion. Chinyu furrowed his eyebrows. He looked at the Eastern Mountain Sword Master across from him. Now that he had finished putting on an act, did he really have to fight? Across from him, the Eastern Mountain Sword Master's voice was icy cold. Sect Master Chinyu, do you think that I don't have the qualifications to make you draw your sword? Icy Frost Sword Sect. Sect Masters Sword Peak. The 14 Sword Sect elders had been standing there for a long time. They had puzzled looks on their faces. Just what was the Sect Master doing? Suddenly, the complexions of the elders changed. The sword aura that lingered around them suddenly tightened, turning into a powerful imprisonment. Sect Master! The great elder shouted out. His voice spread into the sword peak, but there was no response at all. Before anyone could be angered, the sword aura that imprisoned them suddenly shot out countless spikes, piercing into their bodies. Ah! The elders cried out in pain. And what left them even more panic-stricken was that after these spikes pierced into their bodies, they began to wildly plunder and swallow their strength. "Sect Master, what are you doing? Immediately stop!" The great elder angrily roared. Within the sword peak, there was still no movement. With a deep breath, the great elder clenched his teeth and roared out, "The Sect Master has gone mad! Let's break apart this imprisonment." But soon, the 14 sword sect elders paled and despair filled their eyes. Their cultivations had actually been sealed away, and they were unable to move it at all. They could only be slaughtered like fish on a chopping board, and they hadn't even noticed this before. In order to accomplish this, it had to have been done a long time ago. In fact, when they first entered the Icy Frost Sword sect, they had already left behind hidden dangers. In other words, from the very beginning, it was likely that the sword art they cultivated had been tampered with by someone. Ah, why is it like this? I have lived for over 3,000 years and bitterly cultivated to this day. Could it be that I am just a chess piece that was chosen long ago to be abandoned? Sect Master, come out. I refuse to accept this. Even if I die, I refuse to accept this. Ever since I entered the Icy Frost Sword sect, I have risked my life for the Sect Master and made countless contributions. Why must you treat me like this? Angry roars and desperate roars reverberated on the sword peak. But the Sect Master's great array had been activated, isolating the main peak into a small world. Their voices couldn't be heard at all. Inside the sword peak, the giant sword array had been activated. Sect Master Han Jingyang had an excited expression as he looked at the broken hand floating in front of him. It's it. This was the sealed object that countless generations of Icy Frost Sword sect had been longing for tens of thousands of years. As long as he refined it and integrated it into his body, he could break through his current cultivation bottleneck and become the only Emperor Realm sword cultivator in the world. The old Sect Master looked excited, his eyes bright and his sword aura boiling. Jingyang, now is the time. Do it! Han Jingyang cupped his hands. Yes, Master! He looked up and slapped out with his palm. The old Sect Master, who was facing the broken hand, suddenly widened his eyes and let out an angry roar. Han Jingyang, what are you doing? Han Jingyang was expressionless. Master, you said that you were willing to sacrifice yourself to help me subdue the sealed object. I am only helping you fulfill your wish. Boom! A vast sword aura exploded, like a raging wave, smashing the old Sect Master, who had been sent flying heavily towards the broken hand. Ah! Within the old sword cultivator's body, there was a loud crackling of bones. He stood up straight, and the wrinkles on his skin rapidly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, he changed from an old and decaying state to a robust, middle-aged sword cultivator. Traitorous disciple! He roared out loud. Han Jingyang lifted his hand. The Icy Frost Sword sect guarding a mortal sword appeared in his hand. Master, I have completely refined the life-ending sword. The old Sect Master revealed a look of despair. Boom! He slashed down with his sword. The old Sect Master's body was split in half. He could no longer resist the swallowing strength from behind him and was pulled away. The skin on the surface of the broken hand instantly split open. Countless red tentacles emerged, wrapping around the old Sect Master. The sound of swallowing and chewing sounded out. Han Jingyang's eyes burned hot. He bowed. Master, do not worry. I will not disappoint you and the ancestors. I will bring glory to the Icy Frost Sword sect and establish the orthodox sword path. Chapter 1724. The tentacles retreated and the old Sect Master disappeared. The severed hand that had devoured him was actually glowing. A powerful aura was released endlessly from the severed hand. It was vast and boundless, as if it was facing the ocean. It represented an unbelievable realm. Was this the strength of an Emperor Realm sword cultivator? Han Jingyang took a deep breath and clenched his hand. Pa! The severed hand grabbed him. The tentacles drilled out again and wrapped around Han Jingyang's palm. The flesh, where they touched, quickly rotted. Han Jingyang's face turned pale, and large beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He didn't move and watched as the tentacles rotted and merged into his flesh bit by bit. Ah! Han Jingyang let out a painful roar. Black patterns appeared under the skin of his neck and spread upwards, covering his entire face. His eyes turned scarlet. Amidst the struggle and fear, a violent and destructive intent surged out. No, it's not like this. Han Jingyang stumbled and tried to tear off the severed hand, but it had already merged into his flesh and became one with him. The desire to destroy attacked his mind, and his consciousness blurred. He had already expected his final outcome, to be controlled by the severed hand and become a walking corpse that only knew how to kill and destroy. But why was it like this? The chilling Frost Sword sect had waited for countless years for an opportunity to obtain the sealed artifact and break through the limits of a sword cultivator. But in the end, this was the outcome. I'm not willing. Han Jingyang let out a final scream and fell to the ground with a bang. His body twitched from time to time, and the sound of his bones and flesh cracking could be heard clearly. A moment later, Han Jingyang's body floated up from the ground. The black markings on his face had already disappeared, but his eyes were even redder than before. It was like a bloody abyss that represented endless destruction that could devour everything in the world. He raised his left hand and looked down. His lips curled into a satisfied smile. This body was not bad, but it was a pity that it was a man. With a frown, Han Jingyang raised his hand and dug downwards. Along with a piak sound, fresh blood instantly stained his robe. Han Jingyang's expression didn't change. He heaved a sigh of relief and felt much better. Casually wiping his chest twice, he strode out, leaving a trail of bloody footprints on the ground as he walked. After exiting the cave, Han Jingyang flicked his sleeves and undid the formation outside the mountain. The sword cultivators of the Frost Sword sect, who had long been in chaos, were as anxious as ants on a hot pan outside the sword peak. Seeing that the sword formation was undone, joy appeared on his face. However, in the next moment, his expression stiffened. At first glance, they saw 14 corpses lying on the ground outside the sword peak. Their faces were filled with pain, and they had already turned into dried corpses. Looking at their clothes, they were the 14 elders whose soul lamps had suddenly been extinguished in the ancestral hall. Then they saw the sect master, whose lower body was bleeding profusely and whose eyes were as red as a demon from hell, staring at them with a strange smile. Sect master, what exactly happened? A sword sect elder who was lucky enough to survive asked with a pale face. Han Jingyang smiled. I'm a little hungry. I'll eat them. Unfortunately, I'm not full yet. What do you think I should do? The elder's eyes widened, his face filled with anger. The sect master has become a demon. Everyone, immediately withdraw from the sword peak. He only had time to finish half of his words. Puff! The sound of flesh tearing entered everyone's ears. Han Jingyang's figure appeared in front of this elder, holding a beating heart in his hand. Blood gushed out from the wound on his chest, soaking through Han Jingyang's body. Blood dripped down from his clothes. Han Jingyang raised his hand and took a big bite. He chewed deliciously, and his face was filled with satisfaction. Just like that, a beating heart was swallowed into his stomach in a few bites. Ah, run. The sect master is crazy. Quick, open the sword formation and seal off the main peak. Frost the Sword sect was in chaos. Han Jingyang licked the blood from the corner of his mouth. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. With a snap, the Frost Sword sect's formation completely sealed off the inside and outside. Why are you running? I haven't eaten my fill yet. All of you, come here. With a grim smile, Han Jingyang reached out, and a Frost Sword sect sword cultivator fell into his hand. He bit down on his neck, Gulp, 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 gulp. This sword cultivator, who was screaming in pain, after a few breaths, became a dried corpse. He threw him away and grabbed another sword cultivator, repeating the previous action. My frost sword sect's ancestors' hard work is destroyed today. Han Jingyang, wake up. Otherwise, you will be the frost sword sect sinner. The sect master is completely crazy. Ask for help. Ask the Sword Master Association for help. After swallowing more than a dozen sword cultivators, Han Jingyang threw away the dried corpses and revealed a joyful smile. That's right, this was the taste. The sword cultivator's wails and screams, coupled with the sweet and delicious flesh and blood, was a great enjoyment. But the efficiency of doing this was too low. Han Jingyang opened his blood-red eyes and swept across the frost sword sect. The sword cultivators, who had nowhere to run, showed a strange smile. Today, none of you will be able to escape. He lifted his hands and spread open his arms. Countless blood-red sword shadows held out from his body, chasing after the frost sword sect sword cultivators that were fleeing. Puff! A sword shadow pierced through the chest of a sword cultivator. In an instant, all of his flesh and blood was sucked out. He turned into a dried corpse that fell to the ground. The sword shadows that pierced through the chest were clearly more solid, and the scarlet color deepened. Ha ha ha! Eat up, eat up! Treasures! All the sword cultivators in front of you are your sacrifices. Han Jingyang wildly laughed, his voice echoing through the world. Outside, sword prison. Sword breaths erupted like a tide. The gloomy East Mountain sword master's complexion suddenly changed. After a moment of hesitation, he took out a communication jade slip and probed it with his divine sense. In the next moment, his eyes suddenly opened wide and revealed an expression of astonishment. The East Mountain sword master glanced at Qinyu and left. He instantly turned into a sword shadow that shot into the skies. Outside sword prison, all the sword cultivators who were looking forward to the peak of the great Tao almost snapped their waists. If it weren't for the fact that the East Mountain sword master was strong and had a bad temper, he would have already cursed it out loud. What the hell do you mean? We've waited here for so long, building up all these emotions, and you just left without saying a word. Of course, he had already explained the logic just now, so he could only think about it. All the sword cultivators were well aware that if the East Mountain sword master's expression changed and he left without hesitation, something big must have happened. But in Swallow Mountain, was there anything more important than sword prison going out of control? This caused everyone's hearts to be in chaos, and then they felt a sense of heaviness. Just now, the East Mountain sword master seemed to be heading towards the Frost Sword sect. And since the opening of sword prison, not a single heavyweight sword cultivator from the Frost Sword sect had come. This in itself was abnormal. Could it be that something had happened to the Frost Sword sect? Just as this thought flashed through everyone's mind, the sound of swords breaking through the air sounded above their heads, like countless thunderbolts exploding. It moved as fast as lightning, twisting and tearing space apart, forming a straight line visible to the naked eye. Primordius, Sword Master. That's right, only the Primordius sword art can open a spatial channel and quickly travel. What is going on? Before everyone could regain their composure from the sight of the Primordius Sword Master rapidly passing by, the sound of swords rang out once more. This time it was a faint purple. It instantly pierced through the skies above, vanishing without a trace. In terms of movement, it was inferior to the Primordius Sword Master, but its speed was much faster. Even from a great distance, one could still feel the thick sword aura release from it. Purple Illusion, Sword Master. Outside Sword Prison, there was a deathly silence. 3 sword masters were rushing over at the same time. The Frost Sword sect was there, and they were also anxious and anxious. Something had happened. Something big had definitely happened. Chinyu looked up towards the direction the three sword masters were heading towards. His eyes flashed. It's her. Although they hadn't had much contact and had only seen each other once, Chinyu was somewhat familiar with Fei-Fei's aura after hugging her for some time. Although they were separated by a great distance, this aura was far too tyrannical and wild. He could still sense some traces of it. Little Meat, I know you're here. What's going on? I have some time now, so hurry up and explain. Chinyu lowered his voice. After a brief pause, a calm voice sounded in his ear. The big white goose. Yes, by Fei-Fei. She's currently taking revenge. Chinyu raised an eyebrow. Continue. Little Meat said indifferently, You should already know that there are no Emperor Realm sword cultivators in this world. The threshold of the mortal realm is like a natural chasm that keeps all sword cultivators out. And by Fei-Fei is the reason why this chasm exists in this world. Chinyu raised a hand to rub his brow. She might not have said anything, but she had said so much. There were too many things in those few sentences. Bai Fei-Fei was her real name. As for the big white goose, the dazzling scene of white flashed through Chinyu's mind. He cursed inwardly and hurriedly suppressed the thought. It was no secret that a sword cultivator's path to the heavens had been forcibly severed in front of the immortal realm. It was no secret that the root cause was Bai Fei-Fei. Can you explain in more detail? Little Meat said, To put it simply, a long time ago, some people paid a great price to kill Bai Fei-Fei in order to break through the natural chasm of sword cultivators. That's not exactly accurate, because Bai Fei-Fei could no longer be killed at the time. So, she was dismembered and suppressed in different places in this world. Back then, I was responsible for suppressing her severed hand. I chose Swallow Ran Mountain and founded the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect, so that they could guard the seal for generations. After that, I didn't pay much attention to this matter. You know what happened later. Chinyu rubbed his face hard. The time span of her narration was really too long. It was too sloppy. However, Little Meat had given him quite a bit of information. For example, she had acknowledged her relationship with the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect. What *T impersonation? The founding ancestor was here, so his identity as the successor of the Heaven-Splitting Sword Sect was obviously as real as it could be. The Frigid Frost Sword Sect, Little Meat said. In the past, when Bai Fei-Fei's severed hand was suppressed, they also contributed and noticed some problems. Chinyu said, So the sword prison going out of control this time was caused by the Frigid Frost Sword Sect. Their goal was to obtain the sealed object at the core of Sword Prison, the severed hand? Little Meat said, You can put it that way. She had also contributed, but Chinyu probably didn't like her doing such things. Little Meat didn't mention it, but in reality, Chinyu sensed something. A complex expression crossed his face. He sighed. I suspect that the great calamity of the Frigid Frost Sword Sect today was a flaw you deliberately left behind in the past. Little Meat was silent, and silence at this moment represented tacit agreement. In the past, Bai Fei-Fei had been suppressed and dismembered. This had caused a great shock and deterrence to the long-lived races. Little Meat had deliberately allowed the old ancestor of the Frigid Frost Sword Sect, who had participated in this matter, to realize the existence of the severed hand and what it represented. She had hoped that in the future, through them, Bai Fei-Fei's severed hand could be released. After all, compared to the struggles between the long-lived races, the confrontation between the heavens and earth was the true terror. Chinyu bitterly smiled. He suddenly felt that he was far too naive. Others might lay down a trap for tens of thousands of years. For instance, the Frigid Frost Sword Sect had suffered such a great calamity today. Perhaps when the sect was destroyed, it would be unknown just who had schemed against it. It was truly terrifying to the extreme. My mind is a bit confused right now. Just tell me, what should I do next? Little Meat's tone was calm. Turn the tide and become the savior of Swallow Mountain. Chapter 1725. Reopening the sect and becoming the sect master of heaven, Splitting Sword Sect had never been Meaty goal. But the entire Swallow Ran Mountain, the world's only emperor realm, sword cultivator, the first to break through the celestial being threshold, the leader of the world sword path. This identity was a little interesting. Of course, one could not become fat in one go. This had to be done step by step. Qin Yu was taking the first step, and it seemed the results were good. Smiling bitterly, Qin Yu rubbed his brow. Meaty, I feel like you are playing a big game of chess. Can't you explain it to me? Meaty's voice was calm. In this world, some things can be done but not said. You will understand in the future. Go now. Otherwise, if Bai Feifei eats too many sword cultivators and recovers her strength, it will be troublesome. Qin Yu took a deep breath and nodded. He turned and looked at the people of heaven, Splitting Sword Sect. Protector, who? Take them back to the sect first. After a slight pause, he said, I will watch you leave. Let's see who dares to stop me. I dare. Qiu Shan's eyes were red, his face twisted. Qin Yu flicked his sleeves, and with a bang he was sent flying. Senior apprentice brother, the female sword cultivator of the Cliff Mountain Sword Sect flew out. Jiang, Zunzhou hurried over, and after a brief inspection he relaxed and cupped his hands. Thank you for your mercy, Sect Master Qin. Qiu Shan had only fainted. In his current state it was not a bad thing. Qin Yu was expressionless. My tolerance has a limit. Whoever dares to provoke me will die. There was a deathly silence outside Sword Prison. Hu Jiming took the chance to speak. Subordinate obeys. All heaven Splitting Sword Sect disciples, follow me. The chilling Frost Sword Sect's incident had drawn away the East Mountain Swordmaster, temporarily shifting the focus of the conflict. Of course, they had to leave as soon as possible. As for Sect Master, you can do whatever you want. Whoosh, the Heaven Splitting Sword Sect group left. Qin, you looked at the entrance to Sword Prison. You had better stay far away. With that, his figure flickered, turning into a sword shadow that shot into the sky. Sect Master Gu looked at his back, thought for a moment, and said, Mei Shenglin, take the disciples back to the sect. I will follow them. Sect Master. Mei Shenglin only had time to call out before the other party's figure disappeared from his sight. A bitter smile could be seen on his face. He was really worried that his sect master would lose his mind after being praised and do something rash. It wasn't as if similar incidents had never occurred in the past. All of you returned to the sect on your own. I'm going to follow and take a look. Mei Shenglin said as he hurriedly flew into the sky. The one surnamed who was just a protector of the heaven-splitting swordsmanship sect. He had already cultivated his mouth and face so well, let alone his sect master. Although Ho Chi Minh had not joined for long. As the saying goes, if you are not a family, you do not enter the same door. He must not relax his vigilance. It was not difficult for the people from the sword forging sect to understand what was happening. After all, they knew their sect master's temper very well. Zhang Xian acknowledged the order and left. Of course, no one dared to stop them. In terms of strength, the sword crafting sect was not very strong in Yanran Mountain, but they definitely had a wide network of connections. Humph! The heaven-splitting sword sect is lucky today. I won't let this matter rest. That's right. We must make the heaven-splitting sword sect give us an explanation. After the main character left, the sword cultivators outside the sword prison finally had the courage to roar angrily. He wants us to stay away from the sword prison? Who does he think he is? Has the sword prison become the private territory of the heaven-splitting sword sect? That's right. I'm not leaving. Not only am I not leaving, but I'm also going over. I'm standing at the entrance of the sword prison. What can the heaven-splitting sword sect do? Good. I don't like the heaven-splitting sword sect either. They must pay the price for provoking the Sword Master Guild today. I'm afraid they won't have another chance to come to the sword prison. At this moment, there was a sudden roar from deep underground. A terrifying air current spewed out from the entrance of the sword prison. More than a dozen sword cultivators were spitting with righteous indignation, were swept into the air. They did not even have time to scream before they were swept into the air and instantly disappeared. The sword cultivators who were slightly further away were also affected. They all rolled on the ground, vomiting blood nonstop. Run! With a scream, the sword cultivators scattered in all directions. Frost Sword Sect. The 9 sword masters of the Sword Master Guild had already gathered outside the mountain gate. Apart from that, there were also sword cultivator experts from other sword sects who had rushed over after receiving the message. They already knew the reason. The Frost Sword sect master, Han Jingyang, had become a demon. It was not rare for a sword cultivator to become a demon. After all, most sword cultivators had killed many people, and their murderous aura could easily corrode the mind. But at Han Jingyang's level of cultivation, there were not many who would become a demon. But it was also because of this that once a sword Dao expert became a demon, it meant that there was no hope of redemption. Moreover, the Frost Sword sect's distress message clearly stated that their sect master, Han Jingyang, was eating people after becoming a demon. Eating people? That was very strange. The Frost Sword sect's sect protecting formation has been activated at full power. It is extremely powerful. It will be very difficult to break it by force, the Spring Wind Sword sect master said slowly, his expression solemn. Although there was indeed a lot of filth between the 2 sword sects, he did not show any inappropriate emotions at this time. After receiving the message, he had rushed to the scene immediately. Not to mention what he was thinking, his performance was already very good. Sect Master Xie is right. Sword Master Primordius expressed his approval. I once helped reinforce the Frost Sword sect's great array. Its strength is astonishing. Even if you and I join forces, it will be difficult to break it in a short period of time. The best method is to contact the Frost Sword sect's sword cultivators and have them join forces with us from within to break the sword array. Sword Master Purple Illusory said, "A moment ago there was no longer any news from within the Frost Sword sect. The atmosphere was heavy. Whoosh! There was the sound of breaking air at an extremely fast speed. The Eastern Mountain Sword Master's complexion darkened. He coldly said, 'Qinyu, you dare to chase me here? Do you really think I am afraid of you?' Qinyu lightly said, 'I came here not to compete with the Eastern Mountain Sword Master in words, but to remind everyone to clearly see just who caused the sword prison to go out of control.' The Eastern Mountain Sword Master frowned. 'What do you mean by that?' Qinyu lifted a hand and pointed at the Frost Sword sect. 'Sword Masters, if you continue watching, you will naturally understand.' He took a step back and crossed his arms, as if he were watching from the sidelines. But his meaning was already clear. The sword cultivators present subconsciously frowned. Some people looked at the South Sea Sword sect's Wei Hung. His face was expressionless, as if he didn't sense anything. This caused everyone's frown to deepen. Gu Bai had arrived. His figure flickered, and he landed beside Qinyu. Sect Master Gu. Qinyu cupped his hands together. 'I haven't had the time to express my thanks to Sect Master.' Gu Bai's tone was light. 'I would like to know what Sect Master Qin knows. If possible, please speak frankly.' Across from him, the eyes of the sword cultivators brightened. Qinyu hesitated for a moment. He said, 'Since Sect Master Gu has asked, I will naturally tell you everything I know.' These words just happened to fall into the ears of Mei Shanglin, who had rushed over from exhaustion and was sweating profusely. His heart skipped a beat. This surname Qin skill was even higher than Hu Jiming's. His flattery didn't leave a trace, but it was clearly more effective. After all of the people present, which one of them wasn't a resounding character of Swallow Mountain? to brush a cool breeze in front of them. The sense of accomplishment in their hearts couldn't be compared to before. I'm glad I came. Mei Shunlin rejoiced inwardly. He hurried to the sect master's side, a look of vigilance on his face. Qin Yu was a bit puzzled. He didn't know what this sword-forging faction elder meant at this moment, but as his thoughts turned, he suppressed them. He continued to say, "Has sect master Gu heard of the seal within Swallow Mountain?" Gu Bai furrowed his eyebrows. "I've heard of it." He paused for a moment and then continued, "In the legends, there is a seal deep beneath Swallow Mountain. Deep beneath the mountain, there's a seal, and within it there's a sealed artifact. It's related to the fate of Swallow Mountain's sword cultivators. However, this is only a legend and has never been verified." Qin Yu lightly said, "Today I can confidently tell Sect Master Gu that this legend is true. The seal really does exist." His eyes swept over the people across from him. "This seal is the core layer of Sword Prison." "Impossible," the East Mountain Sword Master decisively said. "This matter is a secret. Sect Master Qin hasn't been at Swallow Mountain for long, so how could he know?" "Qin, you didn't even glance at him." The East Mountain Sword Master's face flushed red. Just as he was about to explode, he was restrained by several gazes. Gu Bai lightly coughed. "I ask Sect Master Qin to dispel our doubts. Qin Yu is truly my friend. I, Gu Bai, have also achieved such a cool breeze." At this moment, he felt comfortable from head to toe. Qin Yu humphed. He lightly said, "The reason is simple. My heaven-splitting sword sect is the guardian of this seal to begin with. It's just that the sect has an ancestral rule. Unless there are special circumstances, we cannot expose ourselves. Thus, up until now, the heaven-splitting sword sect's performance in Sword Prison hasn't been extraordinary." Gu Bai said in a low voice, "So this time the reason that no one from the heaven-splitting sword sect has died is because—" Qin Yu praised Sect Master Gu inwardly. "That's right. Not long after entering Sword Prison, I sensed that something was wrong. The seal at the core layer of Sword Prison had begun to loosen. With no other choice, I could only use a method passed down through the generations of the Sword Sect to enter deep into Sword Prison and enter the core layer to strengthen the seal. I originally thought that the reason the seal loosened was because the heaven-splitting sword sect had been in decline for so many years that the sealed object within had tried to escape. But what I saw afterwards proved that this wasn't the case. Someone had tampered with the seal and destroyed its integrity in an attempt to release the sealed object." A look of shock appeared on Wei Heng's face. He had already confirmed from Su Jing and the others that what happened in Sword Prison was the same as what Qin Yu said. No wonder he insisted on entering Sword Prison. No wonder the heaven-splitting sword sect was able to deter Sword Demon from attacking. So it was like this. There was no need to ask. Just by looking at Wei Heng's expression, he knew that Qin Yu wasn't lying. At the very least, what he said matched the facts. Gu Bai took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. "Sect Master Qin, please forgive me for speaking bluntly, but what you have said is far too unbelievable." Qin Yu nodded. "I can understand. That is why I only said this. Whether it is true or not, you will have to see it with your own eyes. I will also give you a reminder. Although I don't have much of a favorable impression of the Swordmaster Guild, Han Jingyang isn't as simple as having fallen into a demonic path. It is best for you all to be careful so that the entire Swallow Mountain doesn't fall into misery and suffering." These words were impolite, but it was precisely because of this impoliteness that it was believable. Even the Eastern Mountain Sword Master's complexion darkened several degrees, but he didn't speak. The Spring Wind Sword Sek Xie Chungang cupped his hands together. "Thank you for the reminder, Sect Master Qin. If everything is as you say, then I will definitely pay you a visit to apologize." Qin Yu ignored him. Gu Bai thought that Qin Yu was far too interesting. The spring wind sword sec Xie Changgang was someone who could face Han Jingyang head-on. To not give him any face at all, and even throw it in his face without the slightest bit of concealment. He was likely the only one. TSK, one couldn't help but feel a bit envious. Xie Changgang frowned. It wasn't because of Qin Yu's rudeness, but because he felt a pressure deep in his heart. His eyes swept over the people around him, and he nodded, indicating that they should be careful. There was no wind in a cave. If Qin Yu had the confidence, he wouldn't have dared to be so arrogant. Only if he was insane would he dare to speak such a great lie. At this time, there was a loud rumbling sound. The sword sec's grand array that had been activated at full power suddenly stopped revolving. Shwa! Everyone's eyes instantly gathered. The cold frost sword sect that was concealed by the array formation appeared in front of everyone. Hiss! In the next moment, even though everyone present was a shrewd and experienced elder, they still couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Their faces filled with horror.